Important update about YouTube playlists. Hey everyone. We've received many messages asking why our YouTube playlists aren't showing up. Do we create YouTube playlists? Yes, we absolutely do. So why can't you see them? Honestly, we're not sure. We've been in contact with YouTube support for several months now, but we still haven't received a clear answer or solution. After much discussion, our team has decided to take matters into our own hands. We believe the issue might be related to the number of playlists we've created on a single channel, possibly too many. Our solution? We're launching 2 additional YouTube channels, giving us a total of 3. This way, we can organize our audiobooks better and avoid the playlist visibility issue in the future. This change only affects our YouTube audience. If you're a patron supporter, you can still access all our audiobooks by visiting the collection menu on Patreon. Thanks so much for your time and continued support. Happy listening. From now on, there will be no more constables, or rather, they will all have to join the police department subordinate to the public security department. Also, the prisons within each country, according to the plan, will also fall under the jurisdiction of the soon-to-be established Prison Management Agency. Indeed, this represents the world government's increased control over the affiliated countries. I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing. Sengoku said worriedly. Good or bad must be viewed from many aspects. Vice Admiral Tsuru took a sip of the warm water in her glass. She loved drinking plain water because it was pure enough. From the perspective of a unified judiciary, this is definitely a good thing. In the past, the laws of various kingdoms were different. For example, the crime of theft, even stealing things of equal value, had completely different severities in each kingdom. If the prisoner knew the nobles, they could even be acquitted. But if the law itself has problems, or the court's referee is unjust, then naturally it's not a good thing. In my opinion, what needs to be reformed is not just adding corresponding departments, but also improving the world government's law itself and raising the quality of the group of judges. Kong and Sengoku looked at each other, both seeing helplessness in the other's gaze. Matters like law were not something to speak carelessly about, even if they were Marine high-ranking officials. This old man is quite curious about who will serve as the minister of this Ministry of Police Affairs, especially the directly subordinate Military Police Bureau. According to the reform plan, this Military Police Bureau will be the department responsible for handling dangerous criminals within the borders of affiliated countries in the future, so it definitely needs to have strong enough combat power. Sengoku sighed. 2 possibilities. One is the appearance of a hidden combat power from the world government, and the other is transferring someone from within our Marines. This Ministry of Police Affairs is destined to drain some blood from the Marines. To be honest, even understanding that this was required for the overall situation, as lifelong Marines, they still felt pained and uncomfortable. At this moment, a flash of inspiration struck the tactician's mind. He looked at the matcha in his hand with a deep gaze and said softly, I think I've guessed who will be transferred. Sabati Archipelago. Since Liberation Day on September 15th passed, the kings who participated in the reverie have returned to their countries one after another, and more than half of the tourists have scattered, allowing the island's flow of people to return to normal levels. But there were still changes. Currently, strange-looking fishmen and beautiful mermaids wearing bubble swim rings floating around their waists can be seen everywhere in every zone, along with teams of Sea King army warriors patrolling back and forth. The human residents have long been accustomed to these things. No one is shocked or afraid of the fishmen's appearance anymore, nor do they scream or gasp upon seeing mermaids from fairy tales. Coupled with the complete disappearance of the slave company, slave auction house, and slave market, residents no longer have to look at the pitiful slaves with unbearable gazes, nor do they have to guard themselves and their children at home trembling with fear. One more thing is also very important. They didn't know what the situation was, but they hadn't seen any celestial dragons come over for a long time recently. This meant they hadn't had to lower their heads in terror and kneel on the ground for quite some days. People suddenly found that their lives had become much more comfortable. However, amidst the changes, while some were happy, others were naturally worried. Because Dragon's Marines strictly controlled the coating industry and hotel industry, they directly lost their biggest source of income from before. Pirates. Currently, on the Sabati Archipelago, any ship wanting to enter and dock at the dock must first stop and undergo inspection by the stationed warship. If a pirate ship or illegal ship attempts to escape, the Marine warship doesn't need to rush to chase. The fishman unit in the sea will be responsible for puncturing the ship bottom, turning it into a gradually sinking sea prison. Since Dragon took office as the base commander here, he has blocked 90% of the gates for pirates entering the Sabati Archipelago. GR Zone 13. This place was originally a non-law zone, but in recent years, a notorious bar has appeared in this dangerous zone. It was named the Rip-Off Bar. Take a look, this is the newspaper that just arrived. Shaki, the proprietress behind the bar counter, held a slender lady's cigarette in one hand and placed a newspaper next to Rayleigh's wine glass with the other. The latter didn't pick it up either, just glanced at the headline on it. World Noble decides to liberate Holy Land slaves, world public broadcast in 2 days. Rayleigh, who was still a handsome old blonde guy at this moment, slightly furrowed his brow, lightly pushed the round glasses on his nose, and said in a deep voice, "There must have been some change within the world government. The various matters in the past year have been full of suddenness and abnormality. Looking at it now, the source is likely 80% from Mary Jo eyes above." "So?" Shaki asked, exhaling a puff of white smoke. "I want to know what exactly made the world government undergo such a big change, and what erased the era created by Roger." Rayleigh's gaze unconsciously became sharp. That was the sharp aura belonging to a great swordsman. "You aren't thinking of... Are you crazy?" Chapter 137, Dragon's Warning and Persuasion to Leave. "No, absolutely not. I don't agree to you going." Inside the rip-off bar, which had no customers, Shaki's slender fingers forcefully snapped the cigarette she was holding, and her angry voice suddenly froze the atmosphere. "What do you think Mary Jo Eyes is? Even if you are called the Dark King by the world, you are ultimately not the real Dark King. You can't destroy all of Mary Jo Eyes with one shot. Or are you planning to be buried with Roger, but don't you think it's a bit late?" Rayleigh stared blankly at the emotional Shaki. It was the first time he had seen her lose control like this. This woman was usually so free-spirited and gentle, even when she was hitting people, she looked very calm. He, I'm just going to scout it out. It's not like I'm going to cause a ruckus in Mary Jo Eyes, I'll just sneak over and sneak back. He said this with considerable confidence. After all, as a top expert of this era, confidence is a necessary psychological element. "You are not allowed to go." Shaki looked coldly at Rayleigh and said, "If you go, don't ever think about stepping foot in this bar again. You should know very well that I am not joking now." Rayleigh remained silent, lowering his head and continuing to drink the whiskey in his glass. Ding-a-ling, just then, a crisp and pleasant wind chime sound rang out from outside the door. Immediately after, the door was gently pushed open, and a tall figure walked in, estimated at 2.5 meters tall, wearing a green suit and black leather boots, a black-haired man with a pure white coat draped over his shoulders. "Excuse me, could I get a glass of juice? Milk cake would be best if you have it." The Marine officer calmly sat down at the bar counter, separated from Rayleigh beside him by 2 high-backed solid wood chairs. His appearance caused the other 2 to fall silent. They could, of course, recognize this person's identity. "I really didn't expect Base Commander Dragon to visit my little shop. But this is a bar, you know, isn't juice and milk cake a bit unsuitable?" Shaki naturally joked, then took out the juice and a dark brown cake from the refrigerator and said with a smile, "I really don't have milk cake. I prefer to eat chocolate cake, what do you think? Is it bitter?" Dragon asked with a slightly conflicted expression. "A little. Then forget it, juice is fine." These simple exchange actually gave the feeling of a normal owner and customer. Just then, Rayleigh spoke up and asked, "How did you find me?" "Where the wind blows. As long as there is wind, there are no secrets to speak of," Dragon replied, taking a sip of the sweet juice. "Then you're here to arrest me?" "I'd like to." "So?" Rayleigh asked with a smile. Dragon pondered for a moment and said, "I want you to leave here." Ever since he discovered Rayleigh on the night of Liberation Day, he had actually thought about arresting this former crewmate of the Roger Pirates, but after considering it for a long time, he gave up. It wasn't that he was afraid of the other party, although his own strength wasn't enough. This was Sabati Archipelago, right next door was Marine headquarters, and he could call for Marine admirals and large forces for support in minutes. Dragon primarily didn't want combat to happen within Sabati Archipelago. He knew very well how terrifying the environment destruction caused by combat between top-tier combatants would be. Even if the Marines forcefully suppressed Dark King Rayleigh and his former Rocks Pirates crewmate Shaki, this island, which had just begun its good life, would be completely destroyed. Rayleigh and Shaki exchanged glances and understood Dragon's concerns. The former swirled the ice cubes and drink in his glass. "I actually think it would be safer to stay here. What if we go out and are subjected to your Marines' encirclement and suppression?" Then Shaki smiled and said, "Vice Admiral Dragon, he and I have already retired. We won't cause you any trouble. Can't even a bar owner and a coating craftsman be accommodated on such a large Sabati archipelago?" Dragon raised his head and narrowed his eyes. A bar owner with the ability to collect intelligence from various places in the world, and an artisan who gives coating to potential pirates at night? The 2 fell silent again. "Oh dear, it seems you've heard quite a few things about me from Garp. Otherwise, a regular Vice Admiral wouldn't know about my matters," Shaki said, feigning ease and teasing. Rayleigh also smiled and said, "You even know about me giving pirates coating. It seems nothing can be hidden from you. Is this your ability? He had recently mastered the technique of coding. Although he wasn't very proficient yet, spending some time to give a pirate ship coding was still not a problem. Because the 2 ships you coded before have already sunk to the seabed to feed the fish. Dragon looked at Rayleigh with a blank expression and continued. You can now give coding to pirate ships you favor. Then in the future, if you meet pirates you like even more, will you teach them a few tricks, like hockey? The training method for hockey is an extremely scarce resource in the first half of the Grand Line. Only some people with exceptional talent can master it through self-realization. Seeing that Rayleigh was stumped by the question, Shaki smiled, changed the subject, and asked. I heard a rumor that Vice Admiral Dragon previously attempted to defect from the Marines. Is there any truth to this matter? Rayleigh looked at Dragon in surprise. Marine hero Garp's son was actually going to betray the Marines? What kind of dramatic plot is this? The latter simply answered something unrelated, saying. The world government is changing. Even if it changes, it's still the Celestial Dragon's world government. The essence hasn't changed at all. Rayleigh's tone grew heavier as he looked at the other party seriously. But it has shown me hope. Dragon said in a deep voice, looking at the newspaper on Rayleigh's table. You don't know the history of the world government at all. If you knew. Just as Rayleigh was about to continue speaking, Dragon interrupted him and asked in return. What if I knew? No matter how unbearable the past history was, as long as the present and future are good, it has no meaning. In his opinion, the past is already past, only the future is worth caring about. I'll give you 3 days. I hope you will have left after 3 days. After speaking, Dragon stood up and was about to leave the bar, only to hear Rayleigh's voice from behind him. Young man, what if we don't leave? If that's the case, someone will come to talk to you again then. Someone who only knows how to speak with his fists. Amidst the dingling of the wind chime sound, Dragon's figure disappeared from their sight, but in his heart, he had already begun considering how to isolate this zone. If he could resolve the matter of Rayleigh by paying the price of one zone, that would be acceptable. Oh dear, what a headache, we've been targeted. Rayleigh laughed. I can get you out safely. Shaki said softly, looking at him. All her skills were focused on gathering intelligence, so she was especially good at escaping. Even Garp couldn't catch her back then. That's right, that's great, then I can rest assured. Rayleigh let out a long breath and put on a relieved expression, then stood up and left the bar, leaving only Shaki behind him, frowning as she stared at his retreating figure. That night, Dragon in the Navy base sensed that Rayleigh's aura had left and never came back. Chapter 138, Holy Land Marie-Joyce is alarmed. At 12:23 in the evening, the bright crystal lamps illuminated the room of authority with dazzling light. The 5 elders had finished discussing the affairs of Sea Star mainland. St. Topman Warcurry looked at St. Shepherd Jupiter and said. You should contact Doflamingo as soon as possible. It's fine to delay the Sea Transport King's matter, but our construction department is in urgent need. All right. St. Shepherd Jupiter nodded, then handed the 4 files sent by Cypher Paul headquarters to St. Jaga Ursha Saturn, who was closest to him. This is the intelligence sent back by Cypher Paul 9 agent from the Stargate world. Take a look, there's a very shocking discovery. Oh? St. Jaga Ursha Saturn raised an eyebrow in surprise, took the files, and passed them to St. Topman Warcurry beside him, who then passed them down in turn. The 4 began to silently read the contents. The first part of the intelligence stated that Lucci and the others had later discovered 11 black-purple corpses infected with the living dead virus. However, 5 of them had their hearts destroyed, and 1 had its head fallen off to the side, belonging to truly dead people who couldn't even open their eyes when fed blood. At the same time, the files included several photos, clearly showing the extent of the heart damage. These are clearly bullet holes. St. Jaga Ursha Saturn decisively judged. That's right. This indicates that the people of that world can manufacture and use firearms. This is indeed very important intelligence. St. Marcus Mars, who oversees the Academy of Science, had a solemn gaze. According to the Biochemical Research Institute's experiments, the heart membrane of the living dead in that world requires an automatic rifle to fire 2 shots in quick succession and hit the same spot to penetrate. Whereas the living dead in our world require 4 shots or more. The question now is, what is the power of the firearms in that world, and is it possible to penetrate with just 1 shot? St. Shepherd Jupiter shook head and said. Unfortunately, so far, Cypher Paul 9 agent has only encountered living dead, not a single living person. They haven't even seen any dilapidated villages or building. It's a strange matter. However, the shocking discovery I mentioned isn't this. Please continue reading. The other 4 exchanged glances and continued to turn the pages. When they reached the last 2 pages, the content on the paper became strange. Because it was clearly a letter written in Wa language. Although the grammar was a bit odd, the general meaning could still be understood. After all, letters here are generally written in Wa language. What does this mean? Saint Jaga Ursha Saturn looked up in confusion. The other three also looked at Saint Shepherd Jupiter with puzzled expressions. This is a letter that Lucci and Mata's group found in the clothing of a living dead corpse? Saint Topman Warkuri and the others were stunned, their eyes unconsciously widening slightly. They quickly lowered their heads to examine the content of the letter again. You mean there's Wa language in another world too? How is this possible? Saint Shepherd Jupiter said with emotion. I was also very shocked at first, but thinking about it carefully, the people in that world look exactly like us, and they wear clothing. There's an 80% chance they even have firearms. It seems understandable that the writing is similar. There are two main types of writing on Planet C. One is English language, used for official texts, professional books, wanted posters, and other formal and serious occasions. The other is Wa language, used for newspapers, letters, and non-serious occasions. Wa language, as the name suggests, is a legendarily originated writing from Wano country. As for English language, well, there is certainly no England in this world, so why is there English language? That can only be asked of the Creator God. Hearing Saint Shepherd Jupiter's explanation, the other four could only hold their noses and reluctantly accept this fact. Meanwhile, the former continued. Based on this letter, which should be from the wife to her husband, we found a few useful pieces of intelligence. First, they call those living dead Cabane. Second, the place where the wife is located is called Hyajiro Station. This station should mean post station. Third, the husband who received this letter, meaning the corpse, is a samurai. Speaking of this, he paused. However, the Hyajiro, Iron Fortress, mentioned inside is still unclear what it means, but this can already confirm that there are indeed cities where humans gather in large numbers. At this moment, Saint Jaga Ursha Saturn, wearing a white kimono and wooden clogs, and holding Shodai Kaitetsu, said with a cold face. Wa language, samurai. It seems the culture of this world is very close to the style of Wano country. Indeed. We just don't know what the combat power of the samurai here is like. Saint Topman Warkuri said with a slightly heavy tone. Pu-upper-upperu, pu-upper-upperu. Suddenly, the sound of a transponder snail rang out from Saint Shepherd Jupiter's pocket. He didn't avoid the others, took it out directly, answered, and asked. What is it? Lord, Lucci and Mata have discovered a railway on a plain. They are preparing to investigate along the track. There's a high probability they can find a town where living people live. Understood. Saint Shepherd Jupiter hung up the call, put the transponder snail back in his pocket, and interlaced his fingers in front of him, saying, What do you think? Railway. I remember it's often used for transporting mineral resources underground. Saint Topman Warkuri said thoughtfully. But I've never heard of railways used on the surface. In the Sea Star world, because the Red Line is forbidden to inhabit and the areas below are mostly island environments, there is naturally no need for long surface rail trains. However, the sea train being developed in Water 7 is said to require the construction of sea-floating tracks connecting various islands. Could it be that the transportation in that world is ground rail trains? St. Marcus Mars guessed. It's possible. But being able to manufacture railways and trains, it seems the level of civilization development in that world is not low. St. Jaga Ursha Saturn exclaimed. St. Topman Warkuri said. Let them continue investigating. There isn't enough intelligence yet. Once we understand 70 to 80% of the situation in that world, then we can consider our attitude towards it. As for what attitude meant, everyone present knew clearly. Alright, it's late. Let's go back to sleep. Boom, just as he was about to announce the end of the meeting, a huge roar suddenly sounded outside the window. The strong air tremor even shook the glass on the window, creating dense cracks. What happened? Saint Jaga Ursha Saturn suddenly stood up, a powerful aura erupting from his body. It's outside, the social plaza. Saint Shepherd Jupiter quickly ran to the window and looked down. The next second, his pupils suddenly contracted, and dense cold sweat seeped from his forehead. He muttered in a low voice. Something big has happened. For a time, Mary Jo Eyes in the deep night was completely alarmed. Large numbers of Holy Land garrison members rushed towards Pangaea Castle in a panic. At the same time, black-clothed Cypher Paul members darted quickly under the moonlight, starlight, and lamplight. The speed of each person left a long after-image. Pu-upper-upperu, pu-upper-upperu. The transponder snail rang again, but this time it was the one on the coffee table. St. Topman Warkuri quickly picked up the handset. Before he could speak, he heard the other party say. Lord Amu's order, do not disturb his enjoyment. Mohawk? The five elders exchanged glances. Regarding the language and writing systems of the otherworld background. If English language, Wa language, or other writing systems have clearly appeared in the work, such as on newspapers or other items, then the language and writing systems are set to be mutually intelligible with Planet C. However, if English language, WA language, or other writing systems have not clearly appeared, and it is confirmed that there are different writing systems and an otherworld background, then the language and writing systems are set to be not mutually intelligible with Planet C, which will increase the difficulty of intelligence collection. In this case, a devil fruit ability related to language or organizing scholars for research will be needed. Chapter 139, Who allowed you to raise your head? Perhaps there are no coincidences in this world, only inevitability. Everyone who comes to this world has their specific mission. Perhaps not everything is accidental. Exploring the unknown future is what is truly worth pursuing. Really, already 54 years old, although he still appeared to have golden hair, upon closer inspection, one could see scattered silver strands. At this moment, his fingers were deeply embedded in the vermilion cliff face. His entire body was pressed against the wall, and looking up, the clouds and mist shrouded, starlight twinkling starry sky still seemed endless. This red line was thousands of meters high, so steep it looked like it had been cleaved by a single blade, making it hard to believe its verticality was naturally formed. There were no plants or trees on it, only the increasingly chilling wind current that howled with the rising height, but to him, it felt like a gentle breeze. After all, he was still in his prime. That guy Roger loved adventure and exploration the most. We went to Fishman Island 10,000 meters below the seabed, to Sky Island 10,000 meters above high altitude, and also to the legendary Laugh Tale, but the one place we didn't see was Mary Jo Eyes, known as the Holy Land. This time, let me take a look for you. When we meet again in the land of the Yellow Springs, I'll tell you all about it. For really at this moment, this operation might be his last adventure. To be honest, if Roger's carefully planned Great Pirate Era hadn't been easily ended, he really wouldn't have wanted to take such a big risk. Because he preferred to wait and see at Sabati Archipelago, waiting for the legendary pirate who could inherit Roger's will, and perhaps give them a push if possible. But now, he only wanted to know one matter. What exactly was the reason, or who was the person, behind the world government's recent various changes? Bang, bending his fingers and exerting force, his powerful arm strength propelled his entire body upwards. Rayleigh was like a swallow flying rapidly along the wall, ascending dozens of meters in the blink of an eye. When he sensed his strength was nearing its limit, he would once again insert his fingers into the rock face, and then continue to ascend with force. This action repeated itself, constantly approaching the top of the continent at an astonishing speed. If Fisher Tiger from the original timeline were to see this scene in the future, his feelings would probably be very complex. Rayleigh's process of climbing the red line truly seemed a bit too easy and rapid. Peta, after an unknown amount of time, one hand finally touched a flat surface. With a forceful flip, he saw his entire body flip once in the air before landing steadily on the cliff's edge. Finally made it up. Rayleigh scanned the surrounding environment, and at the same time used observation hockey to sense the nearby aura, immediately discovering numerous Holy Land garrison in the distance. But more aura came from the large gathered crowd. As expected, freeing the slaves was just a performance to deceive the world. The celestial dragons are still the same celestial dragons. Under the moonlight, Rayleigh's gaze appeared much darker, but he also knew the purpose of his trip and didn't immediately have the idea of rescuing the slaves. However, perhaps on his way back, he could give these slaves a chance to regain their freedom. Thinking of this, he untied the long saber strapped to his back and took it into his hand, then began his operation. Following the shadows of various trees and buildings, he silently approached the brightly lit, golden city with extreme agility. Holy Land, Mary Jo Eyes. The Holy Land garrison in this place had been peaceful for too long, and their vigilance was basically close to zero. This was also why Fisher Tiger succeeded. Even if the alert level was raised afterwards, the Revolutionary Army still easily infiltrated. Now, replaced by the Dark King Silver's Rayleigh, whose strength was countless times greater, there was even less difficulty. He was like a ghost. The armored soldiers standing guard or patrolling along the way couldn't detect his presence at all. Rayleigh's target was precisely Pangaea Castle. Because he heard that the highest-ranking celestial dragons, the 5 elders, were in that place. The sixth sense of an expert was faintly telling him that there must be what he wanted to know there. But then again, the environment here is really nice. Clean wide rivers, neat green forests, even the air is indeed much fresher than below, and the moon looks so big from this place. Rayleigh hid behind a wall, waiting for a patrol team to pass by, and at the same time, he looked up at the full moon in the starry sky and revealed a smile. However, the moon on Sky Island is still bigger. Inside the room of authority, Im held an unremarkable famous sword of unknown name, casually coaching Mihawk's swordsmanship. But even so, he could still easily suppress the latter, forcing him to retreat step by step, his chest heaving like a broken bellows, gasping for rapid, rough breaths. At this moment, the former raised an eyebrow and suddenly stopped his movements. This finally gave the latter time to catch his breath, and he quickly seized the moment to adjust and recover his breathing. Because there were about 30 minutes left until the end of the training, Mihawk thought this was him giving him time to rest. But he found that the latter had actually put away the blade in his hand. Lord? An interesting golden-haired mouse ran in. At the same time, Rayleigh had successfully infiltrated the interior of Pangaea Castle and arrived at an open space, which was the social plaza. When he saw the tennis court, bathed in moonlight, which used the entire Grand Line and Combelt as its court, he immediately felt a powerful aura rushing towards him. This is truly outrageous, these celestial dragons. However, he wasn't interested in these things either. With a sigh in his heart, he withdrew his gaze, and his entire body turned into an afterimage heading towards the gate inside the castle. He had already seen that the lights were on one floor, and on that floor, there were clearly 5 auras gathered together. No matter how he thought about it, it was most likely the 5 elders. Boom, but just as Rayleigh's right foot was about to step onto the stairs, an extremely hot air current erupted from the corridor inside that gate. Its momentum was so fast that he only had time to block with his long saber in front of him, and at the same time, protect his front with armament hockey. The next moment, his entire body was directly blasted back. Was I discovered? But this strength. Rayleigh's figure finally stopped when the soles of his shoes were almost scraping up smoke, but 2 long scratches had already appeared on the grass court in front of him, extending until he stepped onto the court representing the first half of the Grand Line. Swish, Rayleigh turned around and left without hesitation. He came this time to gather intelligence, not to cause a ruckus in Mary Jo eyes, so there was no need to engage in battle. His speed was very fast, or rather, the speed of great swordsmen is particularly fast. However, his figure had just disappeared from the spot for less than a second, and before even a sonic boom could manifest its presence, he was blocked by a beam of moonlight descending from the air. Clang, with a crisp metallic collision sound, Rayleigh only felt an extremely powerful force spreading from the blade to his hand, and his body was once again uncontrollably sent flying back. Tap, tap, tap. After a few heavy footsteps, he finally stopped his figure. When he looked up again, he saw a white figure standing in midair, with the enormous bright moon behind them, bathed in starlight and moonlight. The moment their gazes met, Rayleigh's back instantly felt cold, and an emotion he hadn't felt for a long time overflowed in his heart. Fear. And, who allowed you to raise your head? Chapter 140, The Dark King Rayleigh going all out. What happened? What's the situation? Jian and Stussy rushed over from inside the castle. At the same time, figures dressed in black suits and white shirts, exuding a sharp aura, appeared in various corners with whooshing sounds, instantly surrounding the social plaza. Stop. At this moment, Mihawk, who was already standing outside in the court, raised his arm to stop the 2 women. He said in a deep voice, "Lord's order, do not disturb. That person is." The moment Giant saw Rayleigh's face in the court, her pupils suddenly constricted into a pinpoint. At the same time, a name appeared in her heart. As a woman whose ambition was to become the world's strongest great swordsman, she naturally familiarized herself with the existing strong great swordsman. Silvers Rayleigh, former vice-captain of the Roger Pirates, known as the right hand of the Pirate King, nicknamed Dark King, should be the strongest great swordsman in the outside world since Golden Lion Shiki was captured and imprisoned. Mihawk's sharp hawk eyes stared intently at the opponent as he spoke softly. He wasn't just saying it for others to hear, but also for himself. He had originally planned to find the opponent and challenge him once he broke through to become a great swordsman. Now it seems there's no chance. This time, the opponent will surely die. At the same time, the men in black who had appeared around seemed to have received an order and once again flashed away in unison. However, they only withdrew from the social plaza. They were responsible for maintaining vigilance on the periphery of Pangaea Castle, while also preventing the Holy Land garrison who came for support from trespassing. Are you the rumored Holy Shield of the Celestial Dragons? Rayleigh felt the force field aura that erupted from the opponent's body and the air along with his extremely arrogant words. He forced a seemingly casual smile. But the pressure in his heart did not lessen. At this moment, he felt as if he was thousands of meters underwater, with heavy water pressure and a chilling cold. It made his entire body feel a faint stinging pain, as if being pressed by a blade edge. This aura is even stronger than Roger's, and he is definitely an extremely strong sword master. Rayleigh could feel the long saber in his hand trembling slightly. Pathetic. You are clearly enjoying the honor of being granted an audience with this saint, yet you do not recognize my identity and nobility. How can ignorant ants like you be fit to live in this world? Manifestation as Saint Nerona, stood with his hands behind his back, looking down from above. He spoke words that were haughty to the extreme, arrogant to the extreme, yet sounded perfectly natural and proper to those listening. When he became serious, whether it was his gaze, face, or posture, every single detail was so lofty and self-important. Rayleigh had a sudden realization after listening, and laughed. "Ah, so that's how it is. I really didn't expect there to be an expert like you among the celestial dragons. That's truly unexpected." Just as his voice fell, a strong killing intent suddenly erupted from the corner of his smiling eye. The Mumai long saber in his hand trembled, and a brilliant silver blade light instantly appeared. The incredibly dazzling radiance made Jayan and Stussy outside in the court instinctively close their eyes. Only Mihawk narrowed his gaze, forcing himself to continue watching. In his eyes, Rayleigh transformed into a silver-gold afterimage and rushed towards Lord Dim in the air. However, the latter not only made no techniques, but his gaze didn't change, remaining as cold and arrogant as ever. Suddenly, with a crisp clang of metal, the silver-gold radiance inexplicably retreated. Mihawk didn't even know what had happened during the entire process. "It's like this again." Rayleigh's face turned grim. In that instant, he only saw a sliver of bright moonlight fall, and then a powerful force was transmitted from the blade edge. What exactly is this? The touch sensation is like a blade, but the fleeting sense of dispersion when the contact point separated feels like some kind of gas. Is it hockey? Or is it some kind of devil fruit ability? But he knew that the most important thing now was not to fight this strong celestial dragon before him, but to find a way to escape as quickly as possible. It was just a pity that the purpose of this trip had not been achieved. Trying to run? You have no retreat. At this moment, standing beneath the full moon, seemed to know what was in Rayleigh's heart. That incomparably arrogant and cold voice echoed again. "No, you foolish wretch, beguiled by the will of D, have no future to begin with. When an ant steps into a domain that doesn't belong to it, its fate is sealed to be crushed. However, your courage to commit an unforgivable sin just to catch a glimpse of the Holy Land's radiance is worth a word of praise from this saint. This saint has decided to grant you an opportunity to behold this saint, to have a dialogue with this saint, and to burn your last radiance to your heart's content under this saint's gaze, and then extinguish in the river of history, you weak and insignificant little lamb." Jayan and Stussy were completely dumbfounded. For some reason, they felt that this Saint Nerona had changed. He wasn't usually like this. The current lord made both of them dare not look him directly in the gaze. The oppressive aura overflowing from in the court made their breathing somewhat suppressed. But Mihawk, who was standing aside, was not surprised. He was only looking forward to the upcoming combat. "Hey, what an impressive speech, huh?" Just as Rayleigh was about to say something, a red radiance flashed in his eyes. Relying entirely on feeling, he blocked in front of him with a long saber in his hand. Immediately, a loud noise spread, and at the same time, a powerful force erupted. Whoosh 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 whoosh, that wasn't all. His ears heard faint whooshing sounds shooting from all directions. Rayleigh's face changed, and he quickly brandished his long saber into a blur. Constantly adjusting his steps in coordination with his observation hockey's perception, he engaged in fierce combat with countless invisible auras around him. For a time, the clanging sounds were incessant. In Mihawk's eyes outside in the court, Rayleigh's radiance, which spun like silver leaves, with every blade sharp as wind, constantly crisscrossing around his body, was the best live lesson. Although he also didn't know what ability Lord Im was using, he could see from the scene that there were dense attacks constantly besieging the Dark King from all directions. Their speed and force were so great that they forced him to respond and defend seriously. Good, such amazing swordsmanship. Jayan covered her mouth and muttered to herself. Although she couldn't see Rayleigh's movements clearly, the blade light after images remaining in the air alone were also greatly beneficial to her. Stussy beside her remained silent with a solemn face. Humphrey. At this moment, a cold snort filled with obvious anger sounded in the court. It turned out that the usually good-tempered Rayleigh had been enraged by this relentless group attack. Boom, suddenly, a dark red aura, flickering with streaks of silver lightning, erupted from within him. They swept across the entire in the court like surging waves and mighty rivers. During this process, slender, sharp outlines resembling blade edges appeared in the air, as if scanned by radar. But as Rayleigh's conqueror's hockey gradually condensed and wrapped around the long saber, bringing with it streaks of constantly extinguishing, flickering silver current, these outlines disappeared from everyone's sight one by one again. So that's it, invisible sword aura? What troublesome techniques? Is this some kind of fruit ability? Rayleigh asked in a deep voice. However, M gave no response to his words. He simply stood with his hands behind his back, looking down at him from above, seemingly having no further interest in saying anything more to him. Since that's the case, I'll just have to take you down before leaving. It's been a while since I went all out. Chapter 141, the Sword Saint's god's domain. Hearing Rayleigh's threatening declaration, standing in the air, was not surprised but delighted. He had long been looking forward to finding someone to test his methods on. Although the memory of his previous self made it basically clear what his level was, and he often practiced sword dancing, memory was just memory, practice was still practice. Wasn't this Dark King Rayleigh before him the best test subject? Although he didn't know why this guy ran to marry Joyce for no reason, since he was seeking death, sending him on his way was all there was to it. How did that saying go? People eventually die, and some people just need a little help. As for danger, one could only say that a mere highest combat power could not bring him such a rare feeling. At the same time, a series of rapid whistling sounds echoed in the air again. Although the sound wasn't very loud, because there was no other noise and it was night, it was relatively clear. Seeing this, Rayleigh roared. The strength and hockey within him were no longer held back, erupting completely and violently. Waves of air current emerged without wind, blowing his bright golden hair and his clothing to billow. Nether prison. In an instant, his entire body pulsed. His tendons, bones, muscles, and membrane all swelled up. His bones crackled loudly in succession, and the muscles on his right arm swelled by a third. The moment the long saber, flickering with dense, silver electric light, chopped out in front of him, a brilliant blade light bloomed, illuminating the entire court, finally forming a massive crescent-shaped flying slash attack that slashed vertically. The air caught in its path, under extreme pressure, transformed into surging energy, forcibly pushing away all surrounding invisible swords. The atom wood court on the ground, worth hundreds of millions of daily, was even sliced open with deep cracks like tofu. At this moment, Mihawk experienced the feeling of the masses during the Summit War in the original timeline, those who witnessed him swing a challenging blade towards Whitebeard. Their eyes filled with silver light, the three stared blankly at the shocking massive blade light heading towards Lord Imu, including the 5 elders upstairs and the numerous Cypher Pol agents guarding outside the castle gate. But this flying slash attack, so magnificent, violent, and fierce, constantly flashing with dangerous current, was flying somewhat slowly, and getting slower and slower. This made everyone's gaze turn strange. It was like a slow-motion screen feed slowed down more than 10 times, struggling to approach him in the air amidst the dense air ripples. It's unclear how long passed. When it finally reached 3 meters in front of him, as if relieved of a burden, it completely exploded, shattered into scattered silver light filling the sky, like falling starlight, scattering across the entire court. The scene was so beautiful, but Rayleigh's expression became exceptionally grim, and his mood plummeted to the bottom of the abyss. This is impossible. His move Nether prison, even if Roger were alive, he would have to use divine avoidance to deal with it. But this strange celestial dragon actually blocked it just by having his hands behind his back. But Rayleigh is Rayleigh after all. As the vice captain of the Roger Pirates, he has the ability to maintain basic rationality and calmness at all times, frantically analyzing the recent situation in his mind. Is that a chi-wall? Emission of armament hockey. But how can there be such incredibly thick, even terrifying armament hockey in the world? At this moment, this Dark King looked up at him under the full moon and suddenly realized that the latter wasn't actually floating using a devil fruit ability, but rather stepping on invisible armament hockey. But it was precisely this point that left Rayleigh doubly shocked. This had already exceeded his understanding of hockey's realm. Hockey can indeed be emitted to affect real substance, but that kind of emission is explosive, and cannot be long-lasting. To maintain it persistently, it can only condense attached to the body's surface, which is hardening, or wrapped around the body like gas volatilizing, which is wrapping. In fact, this indeed exceeded the hockey level of these outside top-tier combatants. The previous over these past 800 years continuously polished hockey, refined hockey, researched hockey, cultivated conquerors hockey, armament hockey, and observation hockey respectively to near their limits, and then fused them into one. From then on, for him, hockey no longer distinguished between types. Armament hockey's hardening, emission, internal penetration, observation hockey's super large range, sensing aura, predicting movements, future sight, conquerors hockey's intimidation, pressure, wrapping. These characteristics were completely integrated. Coupled with the accumulation of foundation over so many years, the thickness of hockey reserves had long reached the limit that the mind could contain. Finally, quantitative change produced qualitative change. Not only that. Over these long years, the previous swordsmanship skill had long exceeded the level of a great swordsman. He called this realm Sword Saint. For hundreds of years, he had seen many incredibly talented swordmaster prodigies, but only Rima from Wano country back then was infinitely close to this realm. This is also why Rima was able to defeat the Marine Admiral at that time, the main reason for being called God of Swords. But in the previous view, only when Rima completely stepped into the Sword Saint realm was he worthy of the title God of Swords. Unfortunately, the latter did not have the ability of eternal life, and ultimately lost to the mortal flesh slowly decaying under the erosion of the river of time. Since then, the previous him went a step further, combined his own sword Dao with Haki, and formed these invisible sword Dora that could appear anywhere within the Haki range. The previous him called it God's domain. And, feel honored to be able to die in this place. For you, this is already the greatest glory and grace in this life. Im's ability here is not complicated, not so many fancy things. Having personally experienced his own methods, his interest in Rayleigh also gradually decreased. He wants to use a relatively magnificent scene to send this Dark King to the true underworld. As for whether Rayleigh can become king there, that's not his concern. Crackling, 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 crackling. The next moment, Rayleigh, who was stepping on the court representing the first half of the Grand Line, saw one after another sword light flashing with golden light and lightning gradually condensing behind him. Their number was increasing crazily at a speed visible to the naked eye. Soon the night sky in all directions was completely covered by dense golden light. Rayleigh's narrowed eyes could notice that those Sordora themselves were actually still invisible and transparent, only constantly appearing under the flickering illumination of lightning. Can these Sordora also wrap Conqueror's Haki? And the color is actually golden, never seen before. This is really a big trouble at this moment. Shaki's face appeared in his mind. If I had known earlier. Swish, 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 swish. All the lightning sword lights turned into streaks of incredibly fast golden electric light, like pouring heavy rain under the moonlight. Golden wind blew, condensed boundless killing intent, completely submerged, enveloped, and covered Rayleigh, who was swinging his long saber with all his might. The light mass of silver lightning was crazily bombarded by golden lightning. The Sordora tangled together, fiercely engaged in offense and defense. The lightning continuously collided, exploded, and annihilated. The court below, engraved with the Grand Line, also cracked and shattered together, as if the full-scale battle between the two caused the great sea to roll back, and caused the sky to shatter. It's unclear how long passed. That light mass began to flicker non-stop. Streaks of bright red blood drops splashed open under the illumination of the moonlight, and then evaporated by a streak of electric light that shot past, turning into scattered blood mist. Suddenly, Mihawk and others discovered that the lightning Sordora in the air was no longer increasing. When the last streak of electric light landed, they saw that the Dark King Rayleigh had already fallen to the ground. His back, arms, and legs were all filled with invisible Sordora surging with golden electricity. His gaze was in its dying moments. The long saber in his hand was already a broken blade. Roger. It seems my voyage has also come to an end here. This adventurous life was really good. Chapter 142, Discovering the Armed Forces of the New World. The news of the Dark King Silver's Rayleigh climbing the Red Line and being killed on the spot during a night raid on Holy Land Mary Ejos. With the world government's intentional propaganda, the attention of the world's citizens was momentarily drawn away from the upcoming Mary Ejos will liberate slaves, will be publicly broadcast worldwide. But for these ordinary people, it was at most just something to watch for entertainment. After all, even the Pirate King himself was executed by the Marines, so the right arm of the Pirate King being cut down didn't seem like such a big deal. Therefore, the focus of their discussion was why the Stark King would go to Mary Ejos to seek death. In comparison, the news of Rayleigh's death in combat caused the most fervent reaction among the experts in various places in the world, especially those who had fought against him before. Chen Zhao, the contemporary pillar of the Hapo Navy in the Flower Country. Edward Newgate of the Whitebeard Pirates in the New World. Former Marine Admiral Zephyr, who was receiving treatment for asthma in Drum Kingdom, and Douglas Barrett, who was training the Army unit at Army Headquarters Land Force on the Red Line, among others. Oh, and also Shanks, who was right there in Mary Ejos. The moment he saw the newspaper headline, he was completely stunned. Of course, he had also noticed the commotion that night. At the time, he wondered who could be so audacious as to dare cause trouble in that place, but he never expected that person to be Mr. Rayleigh. As for Golden Lion Shiki, who was in prison, and Burned Eye World, who was frozen, they were unable to receive this news. However, for Dragon, who was stationed at Sabati Archipelago, the biggest point of concern caused by this incident was the sudden disappearance of Shaki, the owner of the rip-off bar. There was nothing he could do, he was also human and needed to sleep and rest. In short, after one night passed, she was gone. Afterward, everything gradually returned to normal. Most people were still more concerned about the public broadcast in a few days, as it was truly an unprecedentedly rare event for the Celestial Dragons to decide to liberate all slaves. Thus, for a world undergoing drastic changes, Rayleigh's death only caused ripples for about a day. Red Line. In Area RL 1556, on the other side of the Stargate, in the world of Cabane, everything was proceeding as usual. Although large construction equipment could not be brought in, with the efforts of enough excellent artisans, the barracks base built centered around the Stargate was becoming increasingly complete. The research scholars from the Biochemical Research Institute, led by Dr. Fritz, were tirelessly researching the cabane inside and out, driven by their full passion and excitement. In addition, a batch of research scholars from the Materials Research Institute also arrived successively. Their dean was actually concurrently held by Vegapunk, the dean of the Academy of Science. It was said that Vegapunk was also interested in coming to see this new world after learning about it, but he had too many important projects on hand. Furthermore, he had just eaten the munch fruit and still needed some time for research and development. Especially the mysterious metal called shape memory alloy that the world government had revealed to him, which deeply fascinated Vegapunk. He had a feeling that the appearance of this thing would bring a huge impact to the entire world. Therefore, he was very busy and had no time to come. But Vegapunk still proposed bringing back a few samples of the Kabinari heart membrane. Woo at night, Lucci and Mate, who were heading west along the newly discovered railway, encountered many Kabane without any surprise. These living dead stared with their already blackened eye whites and bright red pupils, roaring hoarse sounds full of hunger and thirst, pouncing towards these two new sources of fresh blood and meat. But Lucci and Mate had long been accustomed to their existence. The former could casually flick a fingernail to shoot out energy through the air, instantly piercing their hearts, while the latter seemed more accustomed to using her long legs wrapped in black stockings, raising her foot high and sweeping horizontally with her sharp, hard shoe heel to easily cut off their heads. They had discovered that the weakness of these living dead, besides their glowing hearts, was also their head. As long as the head was severed, although they wouldn't die quickly, they could no longer move and would only fall to the ground, turning into a glowing black-purple lump of meat. These things are truly endless. Don't the people of this world clean them up? Mate smoothed her golden bangs, which had been ruffled by the night wind, and smiled charmingly. However, Lucci was clearly a cool guy who didn't understand charm. He continued walking forward along the railway. The former didn't mind, she was already used to his personality. Normally, he would invite her for red wine and buy her jewelry, but during a mission, he would become very ruthless, indifferent, and completely devoid of jokes. Lucci had once told her that he didn't want a moment of carelessness to result in him and her being unable to go to Kona Island to see their daughter again. Suddenly, Lucci, who was walking ahead, raised his hand to signal a stop. He tilted his ear, listening to the slight sounds carried by the night wind, and said, "There are gunshots ahead, but the gunshots are strange. They sound a bit muffled. Have we finally found living people?" Mata said with excitement. "Yes, let's go take a look. Be careful to stay hidden." "Okay." As soon as the words fell, the two figures vanished from their original spots with two swooshes, turning into dark afterimages and darting into the nearby woods. Then they moved quickly in the direction of the railway. Indeed, as the distance closed, even Mata could clearly hear bursts of gunshots, as well as explosions and the humming sound of engines. This caused undisguised anticipation to show in their eyes. Finally, they were about to come into contact with the human civilization of this world. Emerging from the woods, they found themselves on a higher hill. They immediately lay down to conceal themselves, while squinting their eyes to carefully observe the combat on the plain below. Although it was late at night, the gunfire flashes and burning flames everywhere provided ample light for the two of them. From their perspective, they could see a large area of blurry black shadows in the distance, which looked like a huge city wall and various buildings distributed inside. Clearly, they had found a human city. The combat before them was taking place on the wide open ground outside the city. A pitch-black train lay there like a giant beast on the ground, and its armor facing this side was open, revealing the space inside. They saw black-clad soldiers, each wearing a half-face mask that looked like night vision goggles, kneeling beside mortars and firing cannonballs. It was these that provided so much light and noise to the entire battlefield. At the same time, some people were riding motorcycles, holding long-barreled firearms connected by tubes, leaping down from the train and rapidly moving across the battlefield, coordinating with the infantry who fought solely on two legs, continuously performing precise shooting on the surrounding living dead. Although not every bullet hit a vital point, most of them did hit the heads and hearts of the living dead. Moreover, the distance between the two sides during the shooting was kept very close, completely unlike fighting with firearms. So this is the armed forces of this world. At this moment, Mata suddenly raised her finger and pointed to a spot, saying, "Look quickly at what he's doing." Lucci followed his partner's fair and tender finger. Indeed, he saw a soldier, after piercing the heart of a living dead at close range, kneeling on the ground. Then he took out something and placed it against his chest. The next second, with a bang, an explosion sounded. That soldier actually blew up his own heart without hesitation. Chapter 143, Army Lieutenant General Bullet, reporting for duty. What is he doing? Mata, lying on the ground, opened her pink lips in surprise and said. Why would he commit suicide for no reason? I don't see him having any serious injuries. Lucci pushed his dark red glasses up his nose, observed carefully, and speculated. It seems he was bitten on the calf by a cabane, so he chose to commit suicide to avoid threatening his comrades. If that's the case, then the resolve of the soldier in this world is truly high. On our side, let alone the army, even the marine soldier couldn't blow through their own heart without hesitation, could they? Hearing Mata's words, Lucci nodded and said. This also shows how heavy the pressure these living dead called cabane have brought upon them. But I'm more curious about one thing now. Judging from their current military strength and the efficiency of clearing the cabane, they clearly can't eliminate all the cabane here, and I'm sure there are also a large number of cabane inside the city. Mata looked at the open city gate and agreed. Indeed, it must have fallen. You can see gunfire flash everywhere inside from here. So what do we do now? Notify the base in the rear and have them send troops over. Although that city has fallen, there must be a large amount of intelligence inside. Lucci said after a moment of thought. Mata beside him looked at him doubtfully and asked. What about us? Aren't we going in to take a look? We'll follow this group of armed forces. A fallen city is dead, it can't run away. But these people are alive, and keeping an eye on them has greater value. You contact the base immediately. Seeing that he had made a decision, Mata said no more and cautiously retreated. After moving a certain distance away from the hilltop, ensuring they wouldn't be noticed by the people below, she took out a transponder snail and quietly explained the situation here to the rear. 5 minutes later, the call ended. All right. Mata squatted down and returned to lie beside Lucci. The latter raised his chin and reminded. Look at what they're doing? The former narrowed her eyes and looked down from above. She saw that after the black-clad soldier paid a small sacrifice and cleared most of the cabane on the plain, they began using tools similar to large pincers, cooperating with each other to capture some cabane whose limbs were broken but were still alive, and then dragged them towards the dark iron-armored train. They're also capturing the living ones. Lucci nodded and said. Yes, perhaps their purpose is the same as ours, which is to research these cabane. But this also means they are about to leave. Let's hurry and follow them, find a way to board that train, and be careful to stay hidden. Don't expose ourselves yet. After speaking, Lucci took Mata and once again turned into afterimage, rapidly approaching the area below. As expected. Just as Lucci had thought, after the group of black-clad soldier captured 20 to 30 cabane and locked them in the carriages, they began to retreat in an orderly manner, conveniently taking the musket from their fallen comrades' hands and the yellow canister device strapped to their backs. When the last batch of the motorized squad returned to the train, the open armor automatically closed highly, and at the same time, a whistling alarm whistle sounded from the front of the train. Soon, this dark giant beast under the starry sky roared and drove forward, its speed gradually increasing. But neither it nor the people inside it noticed. Two black shadows under the moonlight chased after it at a speed faster than its own from behind, and then, just before the train's speed reached its maximum, they easily leaped one after another onto the tail of the last carriage. However, there was no obvious sound when they landed. The entire process seemed so silent amidst the chugging noise. Mata pressed tightly against the iron plating of the outer carriage, wary of the movement inside where orange-yellow lights shone, and quietly asked. What do we do next? Lucci said with a blank expression. Find a way to capture someone, put on their clothing, and blend in. Since they also use wall language, we can probably understand what they're saying. First, figure out the identity of this group of troops. As he spoke, he took off the glasses on the bridge of his nose, folded them, and put them into his jacket pocket, revealing his sharp, indifferent gaze. Judging from their performance in the previous combat, although this group of people are soldier, their strength is very weak, not even as good as the Marine soldier of the Four Blues branch. They can only be considered ordinary citizens who have received some military training and are carrying guns. Only a few of them are relatively agile. Mata nodded. Suddenly, she asked a strange matter. That's right, but there's a problem. How do you plan to solve it? What problem? I noticed that the height of this group of people is generally below 1.8 meters, with an average of 1.7 meters, while I am 1.85 meters, and you? The sexy beauty with blonde hair and a black dress looked Lucci up and down with her beautiful eyes and said. I remember you are 2 meters tall, right? Lucci's cold face instantly froze. He never thought that one day he would be troubled by being too tall, but the problem was that he wasn't considered tall in the home world either. At the same time, the Stargate base, which received Mata's report, became even more lively at this time. The officials in charge of management quickly transmitted the news of discovering a large city and armed forces to the Stargate base on the homeland side, And then this base continued to report it to the Cypherpol headquarters, and finally, Cypherpol Zero agent was responsible for contacting the 5 elders above. And finally, it was naturally the 5 elders who personally reported to him. However, M's answer was to give them full authority to handle the exploration and development of the new world themselves. After receiving this order, the 5 elders immediately decided to dispatch a large army force to enter Room of Authority. Should we let Bullet go with them? Saint Topman Warcurry looked at Saint Jaga Ursha Saturn and asked. The latter narrowed his eyes, examining the half-exposed blade of the Shodai Kaitetsu in his arms, and replied. It's something he'll know sooner or later. Let him go. That's true. Crocodile has already gone, there's no reason for Bullet not to go. Perhaps after knowing these things, he'll become obedient. Saint Marcus Mars said with a smile. However, to use Bullet, we still need to ask Lord Imut to issue an order. As for us, that bastard won't listen. Saint Shepherd Jupiter said discontentedly. This crocodile is the same. He's been gone for so long and hasn't sent back any news. I don't believe he hasn't discovered anything. Let him be. This is also Lord Imu's intention. Saint Jaga Ursha Saturn said slowly, putting away his blade, seemingly not in a hurry at all. As long as he comes back in the end, the army will have one more combat power. At that time, we will have to train Crocodile. He is still too weak now. At least we need to make up for his shortcomings in hockey and martial arts. At that time, let him go to your Cypherpol headquarters for training. You are good at this aspect. In fact, the best option was to let Crocodile enter the Zephyr training camp for a year, but then he would become a Marine, and Zephyr might not be willing to accept him. Alright. The 5 great lords made the decision. The order began to be rapidly transmitted from top to bottom, and soon it reached the army headquarters land force. Upon receiving the order, 2,000 fully armed army soldiers quickly assembled. This was the military strength of one regiment. Not many. But then again, the Stargate was only so big, too many people would take too much time just queuing up. 10 minutes later, everyone, wearing hard leather gloves, metal arm guard and leg armor, dressed in black military uniform, carrying automatic rifle on their backs, with a string of grenades and a long saber hanging from their waists, and riding military motorcycle, was personally led by Bullet, rushing out of the headquarters steel justice gate with countless rumbling noises and great momentum. At this time, he had already put on a full set of dark blue suit, black leather boots, and a black coat of justice with white lettering draped over his shoulders. Army Lieutenant General Douglas Barrett. Reporting for duty. Speaking of which, I, as an author, am a little excited about the content of this book, especially when I typed out the last 2 words reporting for duty. It's kind of exhilarating. I used to like reading fan fiction that combined all the combat power, technology, resources, and military power of the pirate world and then went on expeditions to the multiverse. But I either couldn't find any, or the ones I found weren't to my liking, so I decided to write it myself. The little author received a good news notification. On the 24th, this book will be on the home page's potential for excellence list, requiring me to prepare 20,000 words of saved drafts for a burst of updates. As great readers, do you still remember what the little author said in the first chapter, that this book has the potential for excellence? Now it seems, it is highly likely to become a reality. All you handsome, dashing, and generous great readers, can you lend this book and the little author a hand? Let's make it hit the potential for excellence list, damn it. Chapter 144, The Beginning of the Multiverse Conquest. 2,000 army soldiers pushed their motorcycles, lining up in a long queue to enter the biosafety station for a complete disinfection procedure before crossing the Stargate into the new world on the other side. There, guided by government officials, they would head to the designated open ground to reassemble. From the current perspective, the entire process would still take over 2 hours. To be honest, just as M had thought, the width and height of this small Stargate severely affected the world government's efficiency. But there was no alternative. They could only try their best to overcome it for now. Bullet, wearing his black justice coat, was the first to pass through disinfection and arrive at the base on the other side of the Stargate. He then began to gather basic intelligence about this world. Afterward, he went outside the prison cell and looked at the living Cabane locked inside. You're saying this thing can easily dent steel plates? Yes. The government official who had previously led Lucci and the other Cypherpol 9 agent members and explained the mission nodded. His name was Addison, a senior director in the administrative department, and a colleague of Coulson. However, it's not exactly easy. According to tests, the Cabane that people from this world turn into, while capable of denting steel plates several centimeters thick, also suffer significant damage themselves from using excessive strength. Only the Cabane that people from our world turn into can be considered truly easy. Having understood this situation, Bullet could already imagine the scene of these Cobain running wildly, then jumping and pouncing. The strength generated would definitely be enough to suppress his subordinate army soldiers. He immediately voiced this point, but unexpectedly, the other party's reply was somewhat surprising. Army Lieutenant General Bullet, these Cobain don't seem to like jumping very much, unless they've climbed to a high place and their target is below. Although with their explosive power, they can indeed jump quite high. If that's the case, then they're easier to deal with. At this moment, Bullet was greatly enjoying this life of being a general again. He was a man born in war, raised in war, and although he had also been betrayed by war, he was still passionate about war, because in his view, those betrayals were also part of war. Not to mention, now he was coming to another world to wage war against opponents from another world. This was even more exhilarating. However, you need to pay attention to one point. An automatic rifle must hit the same spot on a Cobain's heart twice consecutively to completely pierce their heart. Alternatively, cutting off their head can also stop them from continuing to move. Senior Director Addison said softly. Bullet, who was much taller than the former, gave him a cold glance. If it's just about stopping their activity, I think we can just use guns to break their ankles and calves. We can deal with them one by one afterwards. Moreover, in the paper files you showed me before, it seemed to mention that their heart membrane is a very good reinforcement materials. Since that's the case, wouldn't it be better to capture them alive and extract the intact heart membrane? At the same time, there was something he kept to himself. This method would also maximize the long-range advantage of firearms and ensure the soldiers' safety. The only requirement was that the soldiers' marksmanship had to be accurate enough. This could be trained completely. All sharpshooters were produced by feeding them bullets. Now, these Cobain were the best combat targets. As for bullets, would the world government ever lack bullets for them? That's right, in Bullet's view, this operation was less of a war and more of a large-scale combat training. He believed that after these 2,000 army soldiers engaged with these terrifying living dead, they would quickly grow into determined veterans. Then, they could switch to another group of troops. Oh right, I heard that Kid Crocodile came here too? Bullet was clearly annoyed by this point. He had joined the army first and was a proper army lieutenant general, yet he lagged behind a criminal bastard in stepping into this place. What are those guys, the 5 elders, thinking? If they want to recruit Crocodile, just bring him before me. I have my own way to make him completely obedient and honestly be my subordinate. Counselor Addison, standing to the side, heard Bullet's disrespect towards the 5 elders and immediately his mouth twitched. With an awkward expression, he looked around, pretending he hadn't heard anything. Report, Lieutenant General. The troops are all assembled. Please give instructions. At this moment, an army colonel, also wearing a black justice coat and a black suit, ran over and shouted loudly. Actually, the army didn't have coats of justice before, but ever since Bullet joined, all treatment had been brought in line with the Marines. However, the strength of this army headquarters colonel was difficult to compare with a Marine headquarters colonel. They were only comparable to a Marine colonel from a 4 Blues branch. There was nothing that could be done about this. The army had just started out and had been stagnant for too long before. Tell them to warm up the motorcycles. We'll depart soon. Understood. After the army colonel left, Senior Director Addison raised his head doubtfully and asked. Army Lieutenant General Bullet, are you heading to that fallen city immediately? But it's night now, and the order given to you was to depart tomorrow morning. Humphrey, the people are already here, what are we waiting for tomorrow? If my subordinate soldiers can't even manage a night march, then they might as well be stomped to death by me directly, saving me the embarrassment. Bullet let out a heavy cold snort, turned and left the prison cell area, leaving a final sentence behind. I am the Army Lieutenant General. Since I'm here, all military operations here must be under my command. Senior Director Addison helplessly watched his figure disappear from sight, feeling that this person was a bit too haughty and too forceful. Couldn't they discuss things? Previously, the army officers wouldn't dare to be so arrogant and rude in front of him, a high-ranking official. But now, it was him who didn't dare to say much. Sigh, it seems this army is really going to rise. But looking at the journey, even riding motorcycles, it will be almost dawn by the time they get there, right? Why bother? 20 minutes later, although the sky was already dark, the bright moon hung high in the night sky, and starlight spread across the Milky Way, the Stargate base was still brightly lit. Open the gate. With a loud shout, the electric steel gate hurriedly opened wide, as if afraid of being a step too slow and being blown up by the fierce person riding a specially made large motorcycle. Rumble, rumble, rumble. For a moment, this large base located in the peninsula center was completely woken up by bursts of rapid and dense motorcycle sounds. Many people who were resting in the barracks dormitory cursed loudly towards the direction of the gate in annoyance. But Bullet didn't care about this. He rushed out of the gate first, driving quickly towards the dark north. Behind him, large groups of heavy motorcycle soldiers maintained a certain distance from each other, forming a long line and continuously pouring out of the base. At this moment, the world government's army unit officially stepped onto the path to conquering this world. Their first mission: clear out all the Cobain in a fallen city. Their number might be tens of thousands, perhaps over 100,000. But what does that matter? Chapter 145, Crocodile playing around in another world. Hey, look, what's that? On the city wall, dozens of meters tall, a soldier with a gun standing guard next to a garrison cannon suddenly heard a loud alert from a nearby comrade. He quickly snapped to attention and looked outwards. Sure enough, he saw a figure slowly approaching along the track. This was too strange. How could someone be walking here from the wilderness? It was full of Cobain out there. What should we do? Should we open the gate? A soldier asked hesitantly. This city gate was also a drawbridge. Normally, it would only be lowered in advance when a Hyajiro, iron fortress, was approaching, but now it was just one person. Let's go ask Lord Shinshai. I can't make that call. Right. Soon, Shinshai Takuya, the samurai on duty guarding the city gate tonight, received the news. After listening, he looked at the soldier who had came to report with a suspicious expression. Are you sure it's not a Cobain staggering over here? Lord Shinshai, he doesn't have the red glow, and his walking seems very steady. This. Shinshai Takuya hesitated. In the end, he decided to go up and see for himself. But just then, a commotion suddenly erupted outside. This made him frown deeply. At the same time, he cautiously moved his right hand to his scabbard, then quickly walked over and shouted loudly. What's the matter? Lord. That person, the one walking from the wilderness. He's already come up. The soldier who ran over said tremblingly. Huh? Shinshai Takuya was stunned for a moment, then said furiously. You dared to open the gate for him without permission. And no, we didn't. Meanwhile, on the city wall, 20-odd soldiers with guns stared in horror at the ridiculously tall giant before them, mouths agape, completely forgetting they even held guns. This man had clearly slicked back black hair, golden earrings, a black shirt, brown pants and leather shoes, and a very large fur coat draped over his shoulders. The reason they called him a giant was because his height was estimated to be well over 2 meters, probably around 2.5 meters. This was incredibly awkward for them, who averaged 1.70 meters, with some even shorter. They had barely seen anyone over 1.80 meters in their lives. But the most shocking, even terrifying, matter was that this person had just jumped directly up from outside the defensive pit below the city. Hey, what place is this? Suddenly, the giant was the first to speak. The surrounding soldiers exchanged glances. Although his accent and grammar sounded strange, they actually understood him. This our lord, this is Yashiro Station. A braver soldier replied, mustering his courage. Crocodile looked over in surprise. He hadn't actually expected these people to understand him, he had just tried asking on a whim. Alright then, where do you sell food here? It should be the shopping street to the north. It's the night market there now, with many vendors selling food. Having gotten the answer he wanted, Crocodile casually tossed out a koban. He had picked it up from the living dead on his way here. It was clearly the currency of this world. As a pirate, he was particularly sensitive to such matters, whereas people from Cypher Pol 9 agent wouldn't specifically search every living dead. Thank you, Lord. The soldier who answered was instantly surprised and delighted to receive a bounty, which made the other soldiers envious and regretful. Meanwhile, Crocodile looked towards the northern part inside the city and indeed saw a brightly lit zone. Then, under the astonished gazes of the soldiers along the way, he casually walked down the stairs from the city wall. Who are you? But just as he was about to head towards the so-called night market, he saw a samurai holding his scabbard, leading a dozen or so soldiers with guns, blocking his path. This. However, when Shinshai Takuya noticed Crocodile's height and body size, he subconsciously stopped in his tracks. But he had already successfully attracted Crocodile's attention. Samurai. Crocodile glanced down at him condescendingly. But just that one glance instantly made the latter retreat in terror, as if he had seen some horrifying screen feed. He even stumbled back, knocking over several soldiers behind him. Although the former didn't possess Conqueror's Haki, the strength of Haki itself was related to a person's spirit, killing intent, and other mental strength. This made the originally intangible aura manifest as a nearly tangible deterrent force in experts from Planet C. So weak. Seeing how pathetic this samurai-dressed person was, Crocodile disdainfully shook his head and left. He was hungry. Who was he? Did he undergo inspection? After Crocodile's figure disappeared in front of the city gate, Shinshitaka stood up in shame and anger, shouting furiously. At the same time, he angrily questioned himself internally. He was just big, that's all. Could he really handle so many muzzles? What was he even afraid of? How embarrassing. Inspection was a full-body check required for outsiders entering the city. It involved queuing up, stripping off all clothing, and being observed naked by several people to check for any wounds. No, he didn't, but... Just then, a soldier with a gun leaned into his ear and whispered. Lord, but he jumped up onto the city from below? Shinshitaka looked at him with a puzzled expression, as if saying, are you taking me for a fool? But the latter helplessly pointed to the other soldiers and said, if you don't believe me, you can ask them. Many people just saw it. This person ran at full speed from outside, crossed the defensive pit, and jumped onto the city tower. That's right, that's right. Yes, we all saw it. Please, whatever you do, don't provoke him. We just used the searchlight to illuminate the direction he came from. The entire path was densely packed with Kabane corpses. Shinshitaka fell silent instantly. His three views were being severely challenged, and he even felt dizzy and breathless. It took him a long time to force himself to calm down. You guys go keep an eye on him, but just observe from a distance. Don't act rashly. I'm going to see the chief steward immediately. Yes. The night market should be the brightest and most lively place in a city after nightfall. It was filled with a faint lively atmosphere, the enticing aroma of food, and the cheerful, pleasant laughter of young women. The clamor of the stalls and vendors was incessant. Men and women, young and old, wearing various colored yukata or coarse cloth clothing, came and went with temporary joy on their faces. But a tall figure that abruptly intruded caused gasps of surprise along the way. Wherever he went, the bustling crowd automatically parted. It was like a crocodile entering a school of fish, with the startled fish scattering in avoidance. Crocodile paid no mind to this. Following the smell of food, he arrived at a stall selling grilled chicken skewers. After observing the quality of the chicken meat, he placed an order with a stunned vendor. 10 skewers of chicken meat, a cup of alcohol, any kind is fine. Also, a plate of ketchup. By the way, do you know what ketchup is? If not, just give me a tomato and a bowl, and I'll make it myself. Chapter 146, Black Mist encounters a sandstorm. In the early morning, just as the morning sun peeked out, Crocodile opened his eyes, got out of bed, and opened the attic window. A rush of fresh air immediately greeted him as he quietly observed this otherworld city called Yashiro Station. Yesterday, while eating roast chicken, a man named Tianjong came to find him. Apparently, he was the chief steward of this city, a role similar to a mayor. He actually wanted to invite him to be his samurai steward, which utterly amused him. He immediately gave them a demonstration of his gasping laugh on the spot. This naturally drew dissatisfaction from the other party and the other samurai, but after he flicked the wooden skewer from his finished meat skewer, hitting and breaking a blade that a samurai had just drawn, these people became calm again. This provided a very stable foundation for friendly communication between the two sides. See? Now he could even stay in his comfortable little attic as he pleased. Crocodile felt that the people here were quite nice too. Enthusiastic. Looking out, he could clearly see the tall shaft platform and a massive crane in the distance. This Yashiro station seemed to be a city built around the mining industry. At the center was a large-scale ore layer, dug out layer by layer, and that crane was likely used to transport minerals. At the same time, there were also 2 sets of train tracks running north and south of the city, connecting the East Gate and West Gate. After gaining a basic understanding of this place, the first thing Crocodile thought of was the world government's Stargate base, which had already invaded this world. That's right, in his opinion, given the world government's typical style, it was impossible for them to engage in friendly cooperation. They would definitely carry out large-scale conquest and occupation after figuring out his world's combat power level. This Yashiro station, sitting on such a large metal ore vein, would 100% become one of the world government's key targets. But what did that have to do with him? The matter Crocodile was currently contemplating was still about himself. After observing for the past few days, he had confirmed that this was truly the new world. The world government, unexpectedly, hadn't tricked him. Army, huh? It really is a multiple-choice question with no options. As hockey as ever, ha. He didn't know what he was thinking, but looking at the gradually rising morning sun outside the window, he started his classic gasping laugh again. But he was actually just mocking himself. I actually felt tempted enough to want to agree to them. But what if I don't agree? Am I really going to grow old and die in this boring world full of living dead? Crocodile muttered to himself, asking the question. Then how am I supposed to challenge that monster, Whitebeard, in the future? And that bastard Douglas Barrett, if I'm imprisoned in this broken world, he'll definitely find an opportunity to flaunt his power in front of me. At the same time, the hateful, condescending gaze of Bullet, after becoming an army admiral, automatically appeared in his mind. Just thinking about it made him grit his teeth in anger. Humphrey. It's just the army. I remember the Marines have an establishment of 3 Marine admirals, so the army is probably the same. If that's the case, I'll become an army admiral first, and then an army marshal in the future. By then, I'll make that bastard my subordinate. What he didn't know at the moment was that Fleet Admiral and Admiral were actually both admiral ranks, on the same level, differing only in their position. But he probably wouldn't care even if he knew. After all, Fleet Admiral just sounded higher than Admiral. Boom. 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 Suddenly. Just as Crocodile was lost in thought, looking at the crane that was several times larger and taller than a normal crane, a dense bombardment startled him awake, and also startled the entire Yashiro station. All the residents rushed out of their homes or pushed open their windows to look towards the east gate. The city gate and drawbridge that Crocodile had passed through last night were the west gate. At this moment, the east city gate had completely fallen into chaos and panic. Although the incredibly loud cannons were trying to boost the soldiers' morale, the colossus outside the city wall, constantly approaching while enduring the cannon fire and explosions, was utterly despair-inducing. Thud, a soldier collapsed weakly by the city wall, his face pale, giving a miserable smile. He had completely lost his courage, not even having the courage to look back. It's over, it's all over, we're all going to die. Black mist, that's black mist, we can't stop it. This Yashiro station is going to be fallen immediately. For his behavior and remarks that so disrupted the military's morale, not a single person stood out to accuse him, because apart from the soldiers frantically firing cannons, everyone on the city wall felt pretty much the same way he did. Didn't they see that even those samurai who were usually high and mighty had abandoned their duty and spirit, desperately fleeing inside the city? Chaos, complete chaos. Just then, the young soldier, trembling all over as he lay on the ground, suddenly felt a sandstorm blow around him. Immediately after, a somewhat familiarized voice sounded next to his drooping ear. "Kid, I remember you. Tell me, what is that thing?" The young soldier's stiff neck slowly lifted. From the black leather boots, brown pants, the hem of the black coat, and then the black shirt, he finally saw the face of the person who had arrived. "El Lord, it's you." He naturally remembered Crocodile, who had given him a koban yesterday. Last night, he had even used it to buy 2 portions of meat to take back and let his parents and little sister have a taste. In this city where the outside land had been lost due to Kabane, a city where there wasn't even much space to grow rice, food itself was very scarce, let alone meat. Less nonsense. Crocodile looked at the big monster in the distance that looked like a large mass of thick black smoke gathered together, revealing many gunfire flashes, and felt a strong interest in his heart. This other world had finally brought him a surprise. Those living dead from before were quite novel at first, but later they became annoying to the point of explosion, as bothersome as a swarm of flies. Later, after collecting enough currency, he simply used his speed to bypass them, leaving them behind. "Ah, yes, yes." The young soldier quickly stood up, clutching the steam gun in his arms. For some reason, standing beside this lord made him feel a sense of safety, and his body regained some strength. That thing is what we call black smoke. It is said that when enough kabane gather in a small area, one kabane becomes the core, and it absorbs the other kabane onto its body to form a larger body. Although it looks like a scattered collection, they are actually an entity. Their strength is very strong, and their speed is also very fast. Coupled with a body size that is nearly level with the city wall, or even slightly higher, they can easily cross the moat or defensive pit, and then smash through the city wall beneath our feet to break in. At that time. Speaking of this, the young people's face was once again filled with despair and terror. That would truly be a living hell. At this moment, the black mist, standing 30 to 40 meters tall, had approached an open area about 300 meters from the city wall, with bare, undulating gray hills stretching out on either side, devoid of any vegetation. Oh, a bit interesting. A combined monster even taller than the giant race? Crocodile's face showed a playful smile, eager to try. I also know a combined bastard. Whoosh 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 whoosh. The next moment, under the dumbfounded gazes of countless soldiers and samurai around him, he transformed into a yellowish-brown quicksand cyclone and flew out of the city wall, seemingly heading towards that terrifying black mist. Chapter 147, The God of Sand's Meeting Gift. Desert Treasure Blade. Crocodile, who had quickly flown to high altitude, didn't hesitate or waste any words. The moment his upper body returned to human form, his right arm transformed into a mass of intensely vibrating sand, and he fiercely unleashed a sand blade towards the black smoke below, which hadn't noticed him at all. Swish! This sand blade, growing with the wind, instantly became enormous under everyone's shocked gaze. In the blink of an eye, it had already swept past the black smoke's back, diagonally splitting the massive body formed by countless cabane into two, and even cutting through the two bare gray hills on either side. Boom! Only after all this happened before their eyes did a deafening air blast sound, accompanied by surging air currents rushing towards them. This was the side effect of a large amount of air being rapidly sliced open by the sand blade. Hundreds of soldiers holding steam guns and samurai holding long sabers on the city wall were completely stunned by this scene. Everyone seemed to have been put on pause. No longer screaming, no longer trembling, no longer fleeing, even the cannons they called garrison cannons had stopped. They just stared blankly as the terrifying black mist collapsed onto the ground, split into upper and lower parts. The huge gap at the cut was so wide that they could even see the scene on the other side. God! Has the deity finally descended to save us? One soldier didn't even notice his steam gun falling to the ground. He looked up at the tall figure surrounded by sandstorm under the blue sky, slowly knelt down, and shouted with tears in his eyes, raising his hands. Divine being! Divine being! The soldiers, who had long suffered under the high-pressure threat and fear for their lives from the cabane for many years, found an outlet for their long-suppressed negative emotions. One after another, they followed suit, kneeling down and shouting continuously, tears streaming down their excited faces. Ah! What are those guys shouting about? Crocodile glanced back at the noisy rear in confusion but didn't dwell on it. He pursed his dry lips and sighed. Should have brought some cigars, huh? Just then, he noticed that the black smoke, which had been cut in half, was rapidly merging back together. Even the tattered limbs and broken bodies along the cut edges were being reattached to the newly formed body, driven by the surrounding cabane. Roar! As the black smoke reformed, it let out an angry roar towards Crocodile in the air. Having suffered a heavy blow and feeling intense pain sensation, it finally noticed the small mass of yellow sand. Such an interesting thing. It's clearly just a pile of meat chunks gathered together, but its surface strength is comparable to a rock formation. It even has distinct eyes and a mouth. But it's still too weak. The giant trace's body isn't as fragile. Crocodile's fur coat swayed and fluttered in the strong wind. His flat eyes were filled with curiosity. Looking at its reaction, it even has pain sensation and emotions. It's probably closely related to that thing called the core. Meanwhile, the black smoke stood up and swung its giant arm, covered in corpses and cabane, fiercely swatting towards the former's location. Boom! Its strength was indeed impressive. A simple swat created a surging air blast, no wonder it could easily smash down tall and thick city walls. However, no matter how great the strength, without hockey or other supernatural energy, it was completely meaningless to a Logia user who possessed element transformation. Crocodile didn't even bother to dodge its attack, letting it blow apart his body, then reforming from the sandstorm in another spot in the air, reappearing in human form. Seeing this scene, the people on the city wall became even more convinced that he was a true deity. The god of sand. It seems to solve this thing, I either have to wear down all the living dead on its body, or target its core. Thinking this, he directly used observation hockey to give the black smoke a true cabane inspection, sensing it from top to bottom. As expected, deep within the latter's head, he sensed a source point with the strongest aura. However, this also led Crocodile to discover an interesting matter. Such strong mental fluctuation, filled with negative emotions of fear, rage, and greed. The moment his observation hockey's mental fluctuation came into contact with the black smoke's core's mental fluctuation, a screen feed of a strange man even appeared in the former's mind, seemingly a memory about family. So this is its essence. A special strength, like hockey, originating from the heart? The next moment, just as the black smoke was tirelessly swatting at him, Crocodile opened the palm of his right hand. A rapidly spinning sand tornado gathered there. Then let me see what your core is like. Sandstorm. When he unleashed this sand tornado, it instantly expanded into a truly giant sandstorm. It first tore the giant black palm swatting towards him into pieces, then slammed into its chest. The black mist and the sandstorm collided head-on. But the outcome was decided in 1 second. The former's body was brutally torn apart by the surging wind force and the sand, which was like blades. Words as terrible as torn to pieces could hardly describe the miserable state of the black smoke. Under the brutal dissection, the surface of its head was scraped open, revealing a cabane living dead inside whose heart and eyes glowed with a faint blue light. When the sandstorm that Crocodile had transformed into appeared before it, it actually showed a ferocious and terrifying expression, roaring in anger. A typical death throes, a cornered beast still fights. Because its body tissue couldn't gather together under the continuous blowing and cutting of the sandstorm, at this moment, it was like a woman stripped naked, helpless and allowing Crocodile to examine and act upon it. Ha 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 ha, blue light, huh? It really goes to great lengths to show its uniqueness. But that unique heart of yours should have considerable value, right? Since he had decided to join the world government's army, Crocodile felt that from a polite perspective, he should bring a meeting gift. He couldn't have been out for so many days and return empty-handed. Bullet, that bastard, would probably laugh at him then. Thinking of this, he extended his right hand and grabbed the blue light Cobain's neck, peeling it out. During this process, the latter frantically tried to grab him, scratch him, and bite him. Unfortunately, it was all useless effort. It only touched sand, and the former's strong grip made it impossible to break free. Clatter clatter clatter. When the core was removed, the black smoke ceased to exist. Countless Cobain and wreckage and remains fell to the ground. This scene made Crocodile frown. His devil fruit ability hadn't awakened yet, so he couldn't turn the ground into desert. Otherwise, he could have sunk these things into quicksand. But they couldn't be left untreated either. In Crocodile's eyes, the mining city behind him also belonged to his meeting gift. He couldn't let these things destroy it. Thinking of these, he injected more strength into the ongoing sandstorm, making its wind force larger and wider, sweeping all the Cobain into the air, and then pushing them horizontally in the opposite direction of Yashiro Station. As for where this sand tornado, wrapped with a large amount of Cobain, would go, that was no longer his concern. Chapter 148, Army Heavy Motorcycle Mobile Unit. Oh my god. A miracle. The ever-expanding sand tornado, carrying Cobain spinning across the sky, had reached a height exceeding the city wall. It was seen by more citizens inside the city, and even the distant governor's mansion could clearly witness its existence. Then, they watched it move further and further away, gradually disappearing from sight. At the same time, Crocodile, holding the blue light Cobain in one hand, turned into sandstorm and returned to the top of the city wall. This made the soldiers and samurai who were prostrate on the ground even more excited and awestruck, lowering their heads even deeper. Only their mouths trembled uncontrollably, constantly repeating the words divine being. God? Crocodile glanced in surprise at these otherworlders who were already short and now appeared even shorter kneeling on the ground. He suddenly realized. It seems this world doesn't have special ability similar to devil fruit. However, he was too lazy to declare that he wasn't a god. Instead, he felt it would make normal communication with them easier. Of course, he wouldn't admit to being a god either. After all, he was about to join the army under the world government, so he had to be mindful of such matters. Remember, my name is Crocodile. Next time I come, remember to open the door obediently. Immediately after, Crocodile went to the governor's mansion and obtained 2 maps. One was a large map of this nation, and the other was a route map recording important stations. Originally, he wanted a large map of this world, but who would have thought they didn't have one here? However, he heard Governor Tianzhong say that the capital where the shogun resided, Kongakaku, had such a thing. Seeing how obedient he was, Crocodile also took the opportunity to ask about some other matters. How did those living dead you call Cobain come about? This. I heard they came from the European continent, but what caused them to form is still unknown. What ore do you mainly produce here? Mainly iron ore, and some Dada iron. As he kept asking, Crocodile felt like this would go on forever. Under the terrified gazes of the samurai, his empty right hand grabbed the chief steward by the back of his clothing and lifted him up. Ah! Divine being. Please spare this humble one, spare me. The latter immediately let out a scream, tears and snot flowing out of fear. He thought Crocodile was retaliating against him for his disrespect last night. Don't worry, I won't do anything to you, but I need you to come with me. After saying that, regardless of whether he agreed or not, Crocodile directly released a surging sandstorm. This blew the surrounding samurai off balance. When they opened their eyes again, the sandstorm had dissipated, but Crocodile and Governor Tianzhong had also vanished without a trace. These people stared at each other in astonishment. Logically, as samurai, their duty was to protect their master. But the problem now was that their master had been taken away by a deity. How were they supposed to explain this to Kongakaku? Meanwhile, on the plain outside the fallen dead city discovered by Lucci and Mata last night, a larger army in black uniforms, with different equipment and uniforms than the armed forces from that night, was present. Under the loud command of a 5-meter-tall blonde general, they were riding military heavy motorcycles, holding automatic rifles, and rapidly weaving through countless Cobain. At the same time, they fired intensely at their legs, causing them to fall to the ground one after another, emitting meaningless cries of pain and roars. Da. For a time, the vast plain was completely covered by extremely loud and rapid gunshots and the rumbling sound of motorcycles. These people were naturally the Army Heavy Motorcycle Mobile Unit led by Douglas Barrett. When they first arrived here, The morning sun had just emerged halfway above the horizon. That was the same time when Crocodile opened the window and breathed in the fresh air at Yashiro Station. Although they had traveled all night under the stars and moon, Bullet did not order a rest. Instead, after letting his soldiers make minor adjustments and check their weapons and equipment, he divided them into 200 squads of 10 people each, and then further divided these into 2 large groups of 100 squads, ordering them to carry out the clearing mission in turns. With an order, the first group of 100 squads spread out to both sides. Relying on the high mobility of the motorcycles, they quickly completed a full deployment, clearing layer by layer towards the city. Since they didn't need to kill, only break legs, the efficiency was quite high. However, such a large commotion completely alerted the cabane in the city. Dense crowds of living dead poured out from the drawbridge, looking like a dark, flowing black river. Seeing this, Bullet issued another order. Soon, the first group of 100 squads, already close to the city wall, turned their motorcycle heads and moved in 2 directions, causing the black river behind them to also split. Immediately after, the second group of 100 squads fully entered the field. Cooperating with the first group of 100 squads who were attracting the black river, they continuously fired from the sides, occasionally throwing grenades for bombing. The mobility of the motorcycles and the range of the automatic rifles were utilized to their fullest. Under Bullet's loud coordination, they weaved through each other and circled around, giving these slow-moving living dead no chance to approach. They rapidly wore down the body size of the Black River with bullets, gasoline, and grenades. Fortunately, the motorcycles they rode were military heavy motorcycles. Not only were the fuel tank reserves large enough, but they also had spare fuel tanks that could be switched to at any time. However, judging by the number of these cabane, there definitely wouldn't be enough gasoline for the return trip. But this was no big deal. There was a complete Stargate base behind them. Although the inability of large vehicles to enter had a negative impact on efficiency, they could still transport a batch of gasoline. Roar. Suddenly, just when everything seemed orderly, a cabane with a body size about half a meter taller than its peers roared and threw a fellow cabane like a sandbag, successfully knocking an army soldier off his motorcycle. Chaos ensued. When the soldiers around it discovered this situation, they quickly aimed their muzzles and fired fiercely. Bullets with pointed tips shot out from the spurting gunfire flash. But this cabane did something astonishing. It actually grabbed 2 fellow cabane, one in each hand, and swung them forcefully, actually blocking most of the bullets. Not only that, but it also had a cabane stuck to its chest and back, acting as a meat shield. From time to time, it would throw the cabane in its hands towards the rapidly moving motorcycles, and then grab another fellow cabane. Its arm strength seemed unusual. The cabane it threw were very fast. Although they couldn't be compared to Cannonball, they could indeed keep up with the movement of the motorcycles. Most astonishingly, with each roar, the nearby cabane actually slowly gathered towards it as if hypnotized. At this moment, Douglas Barrett, sitting on his specially made large heavy motorcycle, also noticed this special cabane with his terrifying tiger-like eyes. A bit interesting. Let me see what kind of capacity you have. Swish, the next moment, his massive body size, with a speed that felt contradictory, instantly turned into a black afterimage and disappeared from the motorcycle seat. Then, in the blink of an eye, he appeared above the head of the tall cabane, which was over 1.8 meters. Bullet's black justice coat fluttered in the wind. Behind him was the morning sun gradually rising into the high altitude. A huge shadow immediately covered the latter's figure. He pressed down with one palm. Chapter 149, Birth of Army Lieutenant General Sand Crocodile. Boom, the surrounding army soldiers couldn't see Bullet's striking motion at all. They only felt a ball of white mist explode open in front of the latter. The next moment, that special cabane, which had 2 cabane stuck to its body and was holding 2 more in its hands. Under a kind of invisible heavy pressure, its head indented little by little into its chest cavity, seemingly slow but actually fast. Finally, it smashed heavily onto the ground. This smash of its not only created a large pit in the ground under its feet but also produced layers of shockwaves that spread out in all directions. Dense cracks continuously spread out, and large plumes of thick smoke suddenly rose up. This was still the result of Bullet deliberately holding back a lot of strength. When the smoke was blown away by the gale, he casually waved out. At the center of the pit, there was already no cabane, only a puddle of viscous bloody mess remaining. Hey, is that all? Bullet glanced disdainfully at the finished product. He turned around and walked slowly towards his heavy motorcycle, occasionally smashing the pouncing cabane into meat paste and sending them flying away. Hurry up. After 2 hours, I'm going to rest inside the city. As mentioned before, the main purpose of this military operation, for him, was actually training soldiers. As for how much intelligence there was inside that city, that wasn't his job to care about. Inside the Stargate base, Senior Director Addison had just hung up the call on the transponder snail in front of his desk. However, the look of surprise on his face did not dissipate for a long time. Holding the handset, he didn't think about putting it back. Instead, he held it in his hand and rubbed it carefully, his mind falling into deep thought. Crocodile agreeing to join the army is not very surprising, although it was much earlier compared to the number of days expected. But he actually discovered an intact human city, and it's one with a large iron mine and complete facilities. He also wants to capture some kind of black smoke core Cobain and the chief steward of that city. Any one of these three has extremely important value for the current world government. Especially that chief steward, who sounds clearly like a high-ranking official of this nation, definitely possesses a large amount of intelligence. Thinking of this, Addison hurriedly turned the dial on the transponder snail's body and began to contact the home base on the other end of the Stargate. Here's the situation. He first explained Crocodile's matter, and immediately after, submitted an application, saying, "We here need an expert skilled in interrogation and torture." "Okay, thank you." Immediately after, he also gave Dr. Fritz of the Biochemical Research Institute a phone call, telling the other party that a special blue light Cobain would be sent over very soon. At the same time, he also briefly mentioned the intelligence regarding black smoke introduced by Crocodile. "Then what are we waiting for? Send it over quickly." As expected, Dr. Fritz was very excited after hearing this. But this also made Senior Director Addison helplessly repeat the words he had just said. "This requires waiting for Crocodile to return. You just need to be prepared." After speaking, he directly hung up, no longer wasting words with the other party. Afterwards, he also needed to arrange teams to take gasoline and personnel responsible for collecting intelligence and send them to Bullet's side. To be honest, Han Meng. Sigh, I really envy that guy Coulson. Taking people traveling every day, delivering document or something, how leisurely. At this time, Addison no longer had the excitement he felt when he first came to this new world. Only tired spirit remained. However, what he didn't expect was, not only did Crocodile agree to join the army earlier than he expected, but he also returned earlier than he expected. The next day, afternoon, evening. The gate of the Stargate base was already completely open. Army soldiers holding guns stood on both sides of the main road, forming a long line. Led by Senior Director Addison, a group of government officials wearing suit and leather shoes collectively appeared in front of the gate, waiting for someone's return. Among them, there was also an anxious-faced old man wearing a white coat, and an army officer wearing a black justice coat. Whoosh, however, that person also didn't make them wait for too long. As a ball of earthy yellow quicksand cyclone generated out of thin air outside the gate. Soon. Crocodile, holding the blue light Cobain in one hand and grabbing Governor Tianzhong by the back with the other, slowly appeared from the sandstorm. At this moment, the former was still tirelessly struggling madly, while the latter had already completely fallen unconscious. After all, ordinary people really can't stand flying at high speed in the air. Bang, one could see Crocodile casually threw Governor Tianzhong over, letting a man in black who walked forward catch him, and grinned and laughed. "This person is the chief steward of Yashiro Station. You guys interrogation him yourselves. As for this one." But he had just raised the blue heart Kabinari in his left hand, when he suddenly saw the old man wearing a white coat in the crowd. Before he could finish speaking, he ran in front of him with astonishing speed. While pushing the glasses on his nose, he observed the Cobain in his hand. It really is blue light. Can it really absorb other Cobain? "Who are you?" Crocodile looked at the other party displeasantly and asked. "This is Dr. Fritz, the Dean of the Biochemical Research Institute. He is personally responsible for the research regarding Cobain." Senior Director Addison walked over and smiled. "All right, this thing is also handed over to you guys." Crocodile nodded indifferently. He casually threw the Cobain in his hand onto the open ground to the side, completely not caring if it would injure people. Because only the core controlled and supplemented by a large amount of Cobain is dangerous. But a core that has nothing, even if its heart, blood vessel, and pupil are blue, it can only be considered a flash Cobain. As for that mental fluctuation, it clearly has no danger. Moreover, even if there is, he doesn't care. If it can injure people even in this space, then Crocodile would really have to reconsider the matter of joining the army. After all, this is too useless. As expected, any man in black who casually walked out could easily subdue it, skillfully taking an iron ball and stuffing it into its mouth. Then took the straps on both sides and tied them behind its head. Immediately after, they tightly handcuffed its hands behind its back using handcuffs. Finally, they pinched the back of its neck and quickly lifted it away. The entire process took no more than 10 seconds time. Seeing the special Cobain being taken away, Dr. Fritz no longer had a trace of interest in this place and turned around and left. At this time, That Army Rear Admiral, draped in a black justice coat, walked forward holding a folded black military uniform in both hands, and shouted with full spirit, "Welcome, Vice Admiral Crocodile, to joining the army. Please put on the coat." "Oh?" Crocodile raised an eyebrow. He glanced at the gazes of everyone present, grabbed the fur coat on his shoulder, and threw it aside. Then picked up the topmost black justice coat and draped it behind him. At this instant, Pirate Crocodile is dead. Army Crocodile is reborn. Behind him, the sky's sunset glow was like fire. The sunset was setting in the west, but the bright moon hung high. Suddenly, the Army Rear Admiral and Senior Director Addison and others in front of him keenly noticed that Crocodile's temperament had changed. Or rather, the aura on his body changed, becoming much stronger. They only felt as if a sandy yellow Emperor Crocodile appeared before their eyes, roaring with its head raised behind him. "Do you have a cigar? Vice Admiral, please." That Army Rear Admiral seemed to have been prepared early. He immediately took out a cigar, lit it, and handed it over. Crocodile took it, put it in his mouth, and took a deep puff. When he exhaled smoke, his fingers holding the cigar, he suddenly grinned widely and began to laugh loudly with complicated feelings. Ha! 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 Army Lieutenant General Sand Crocodile is born in the New World. Chapter 150, The True or False Grace and Boon. The army continued to develop rapidly in the Kubanrai world, while the Marines, completely unaware, remained busy on the home sea star with a large-scale operation to clear out the slave trade. Warships sailed to various islands in every sea area, sending batches of liberated slaves back to their hometowns, earning the gratitude of the citizens time and again. In this process, the world government's reputation in various countries gradually shifted from fear to a respectful awe, which was actually a very rare occurrence. On this day, the public broadcast was activated again. On the Red Line, the RL0002 area was separated from the Holy Land Marriageos only by the RL0001 area, where the world government's new headquarters was under construction. Originally, this was just an unremarkable summer island, with no one living here, only a patch of flower beds blooming in various colors. But today, it was bustling with activity, filled with the clamor of people, and simultaneously became the focus of the entire world's attention. Are we really being released? Is this true? Oh, God. It must be a dream, right? Is this a dream? Woo-wah-woo. One by one, male and female slaves had their explosive collars removed. Then, under the arrangement of the black-clothed officials, they lined up in long queues, heading towards the designated areas, waiting for the subsequent liberation process. But during this process, these slaves, who had only been in marriageos for a few months, were overwhelmed with emotion and cried uncontrollably. Some even hugged each other, feeling the warmth of the other person's body, even if they didn't know each other and regardless of gender. At this moment, they were all the same. They were all unfortunate souls regaining their freedom and new life. And all of this was broadcast by the staff of the propaganda department, using visual den mushy feeds, to citizens in various places in the world. The screen feed showed a sea of people. The occasional overhead views were even more spectacular. In the camera's lens, it seemed as though the entire RL0002 area was filled with slaves waiting to be liberated. Their number was far more than 10,000, there were definitely tens of thousands, perhaps even over 100,000. At this point, except for a small minority who remained skeptical and held prejudice against the world government, most citizens believed that the celestial dragons had truly done a great deed this time. They began to cheer and applaud. The entire world was praising Mary Joyce's actions. No one would be so foolish as to question. Is merely releasing them enough? What about the physical and mental damage they suffered, and the time that was wasted? After all, this world was different from the world with perfect rule of law. In the eyes of most citizens, the descendants of the Creator, the celestial dragons, known as world nobles, being willing to respect and cooperate with the Reverie's agenda item was already an act of great mercy, the first in hundreds of years. What else could they want? What could you possibly do? This day was later called the Great Holy Land Liberation by future generations. It was also recorded in the history textbooks that would be universally adopted in the future, becoming multiple-choice questions, reading comprehension questions, and essay topics on exam papers. However, liberating tens of thousands, or even over 100,000 slaves, was not something that could be completed in a single day. It took a full 3 days before it was officially announced to be finished. For these 3 days, the visual den mushy took turns live broadcasting. Even if most people couldn't stay awake and went to sleep, the live broadcast screen feed remained on, precisely to prove its authenticity. And honestly, the strategy devised by the propaganda department really did fool 80 to 90% of the citizens. But what was the truth? The truth was that only a little over 10,000 carefully selected slaves were truly released. These were ones who hadn't been in the Holy Land for long, hadn't suffered excessive torment, had relatively normal mental states, and most importantly, were high-quality slaves who didn't harbor extreme hatred and had shown good behavior. So where did the remaining slaves go? In fact, the explosive collars on their necks were also removed, but they were sent to the adjacent Spring Zone RL0003 and Autumn Zone RL0004. There, the workers from the construction department had already built infrastructure sufficient for them to live. True, infrastructure? Besides wooden houses, wooden beds, wooden tables, wooden chairs, simple pots, bowls, basins, spoons, chopsticks, bedding, pillows, and necessary toilets and bathhouses, there wasn't a single extra building or item. Although it looked like a decent town from a distance, upon entering, it appeared very rudimentary. When the public broadcast was turned off, when all the focus dissipated, these 100,000 or so slaves. Oh no, they were no longer slaves. Now they should be called citizens of St. Grace City and St. Boone City. Once again gathered in the Central Plaza according to the broadcast's order. In terms of obedience, they had no problems. They were very compliant and submissive. Citizens of St. Grace City. A high-ranking official from the administrative department stood on the platform that had been prepared long ago, holding a loudspeaker and shouting towards the dense crowd below. At the same time, loudspeaker transponder snails in various locations simultaneously transmitted his voice. From now on, this will be everyone's homeland. No one will enslave you, and no one will beat or scold you. You are the first official residents of a normal city on the Red Line. You should feel honor and pride for this. But you also need to learn to be self-sufficient. The great world government has decided to subsidize you with all agricultural tools, machinery, seeds, chicks, piglets, 1 year's worth of food and supplies, and also waive the heavenly tribute for 4 years. In other words, for this first year, you can live here carefree. But starting from the second year, you'll have to eat and use your own produce. After saying so much, the high-ranking official was a bit thirsty. Fortunately, he was experienced and had prepared a thermos cup long ago. He quickly took a breath, took a sip of the tea inside to moisten his throat, and then picked up the loudspeaker again and shouted. I know it will be difficult for you to immediately settle into life, but it's okay. We officials will temporarily stay here to help you and guide you onto the right track. If any of you get sick or injured, notify us immediately. We will provide comprehensive medical services. However, once you have your own output and income, all services will be charged. Of course, the government will also purchase supplies from you. But no matter how hard he shouted, the crowd below remained silent. Everyone's face held a numb expression. They were listening, but that was all they were doing. However, the world government officials present were not surprised by this. They believed that time was the best medicine, and after some time in a relaxed and comfortable environment, they would naturally slowly return to normal. First, let them follow commands to cultivate the land and raise chickens and pigs to ensure a stable food source starting from the second year. The high-ranking official stepped down from the platform and whispered to a subordinate who approached him. Have the undercover agents lurking among them keep a close eye. As soon as anyone shows hatred towards the world government and the celestial dragons, report it immediately for handling. But be careful not to be discovered by too many people. Yes. Chapter 151, The Security Problem of Mary Jo Eyes. Inside the room of authority. Im was naturally aware of the outside matters, but after a brief understanding, he stopped paying attention because he was currently thinking about the very important matter. The security problem of Mary Jo Eyes. Whether it was the incident a few days ago where Riley snuck in, or the incident in the original timeline where Fisher Tiger caused a ruckus, both proved that the several thousand-meter-high red line rock wall simply couldn't stop some high-strength individuals with intentions from coming up. On this point, both the Celestial Dragons and Cypher Paul were overly confident. For this reason, he had already ordered the 5 elders to solve this problem. At the very least, they must ensure that the edge of the red line within the scope of Mary Jo Eyes is controlled, and the situation where one can directly enter the Holy Land just by climbing must not happen again. However, Im always felt that simply adding movable surveillance and Mushy and strengthening the Holy Land garrison's standing guard and patrols was not enough. There must be a large-scale alert method that provides 24-hour real-time monitoring, capable of detecting any outsider entering immediately. His hockey could certainly do this, but he couldn't keep it active all the time. Moreover, if he had to do everything himself, what were the people under him for? What should be done? Whether using technology or devil fruit, this problem must be solved. Unfortunately, M currently had no leads. In his helplessness, he could only order the Cypher Paul agent stationed in Mary Jo Eyes to patrol the surrounding area in pairs. Before this, their main responsibility was to follow each celestial dragon, essentially serving as personal bodyguards. Standing guard and patrolling were tasks performed by the Holy Land garrison. But now it was obvious that the latter's strength was too weak. Although they wore quality armor and had good physical ability, not having observation hockey was a critical weakness. How many of the individuals who dared to sneak into Mary Jo's were ordinary people? Although prolonged use of observation hockey would tire the Cypher Paul agent's spirit, they could certainly take turns. South Blue. Yanod Kingdom. You watched the live broadcast these past few days, didn't you, Pericles? The king, wearing a gold crown inlaid with sapphires, looked excitedly at the prince below the stage and laughed. Royal father, your son has watched it. Pericles nodded, sighing. Even the world noble has freed the slave in the Holy Land. It seems the world government is serious this time. It must be that the beautiful Queen Atoheim's speech also moved the celestial dragons. The king slapped the armrest of his throne, stood up, and said loudly. That's right, it must be. Prince Pericles lowered his head silently, feeling helpless. He always felt that his royal father, who returned after attending the reverie, was a bit strange, no, very strange. Before, he clearly had considerable resentment and worry about freeing slave, but upon returning, he immediately ordered preparations for freeing slave and instructed official to make plans. Furthermore, he frequently visited various factories to see the slave worker, weeping profusely and expressing his apologies to them, fully displaying his sense of shame. However, surprisingly, perhaps because he had treated the slave relatively well in the past, it did indeed earn him the understanding and moved some slave. Finally, after discussion, it was decided to free the slave in batches, while simultaneously hiring professional worker from outside, and trying their best to persuade some slave with good attitude to stay and continue working as formal worker, receiving wages. There was no other way, this was the best method they could think of. Releasing all the slave at once would result in too great a loss. Although this current approach also required a large amount of funding and would significantly impact productivity. But as he had said before, a severe blood exchange is better than dying directly, isn't it? Royal father, you called me here this time for. Oh, right. The king snapped back to attention, remembering the main matter, and sat back on the throne, laughing. It's about the South Blue Alliance matter from before. I just received news that they have disbanded on their own. Is it because of the public broadcast of the One Piece Great Sea battle that happened before? Prince Pericles speculated after a moment of thought. Exactly. You are indeed a clever child. The king laughed heartily with satisfaction, saying. Those kingdom are completely terrified. They realize that their alliance army was purely overestimating themselves in front of Marine headquarters. So now, the so-called South Blue Alliance only has the St. Margaret Kingdom, the initiating nation, left. Prince Pericles sighed. That does avoid a war, and fewer people will die, but the St. Margaret royalty will likely suffer terribly. The world government couldn't possibly have heard nothing about the South Blue Alliance, a matter affecting over a dozen kingdoms. Besides that, the royalty of other kingdom that joined will also be heavily punished to varying degrees, I suppose. However, the world government has changed quite a bit recently, so it's really unclear how it will be. If it were before, there would be no need to guess, the entire nation would definitely be dragged to the bridge on the sea in the East Blue. The king nodded repeatedly with lingering fear, looking gratefully at his eldest prince. Yes, fortunately, you advised your royal father against it back then. Otherwise, we would be in big trouble now. From now on, if you have any opinion, you must tell me immediately. Understood. Seeing his royal father become so reasonable, Pericles felt that this great change was not bad, but he was curious about what had happened. At the same time, just as the father and son were talking, the two docks of the St. Margaret Kingdom, which they had mentioned earlier, were now blockaded by Marine warship. However, these were not large headquarters warship from Marine headquarters, but small Marine warship from the local South Blue branch. Although their volume was not very large, their armor was not very sturdy, and the number and power of their cannon were far inferior to headquarters warship. Fortunately, quite a few ships arrived, a total of 6. They came from the South Blue 125th branch base. This mission was personally led by Colonel Wolf, the base commander of that branch. His adjutant was Lieutenant Colonel Harlows, the former Colonel Hose, base commander of the 194th branch on Watermelon Island in the South Blue, who was transferred and demoted due to bribery involving the slave king. He was now a lieutenant colonel. But Lieutenant Colonel Harlows felt no dissatisfaction in his heart. Instead, he felt extremely fortunate, exclaiming that headquarters had shown him mercy this time by not sending him to take a look at Anai's lobby. He believed this was Marine headquarters showing consideration for his son, Gasperty. Through transponder snail contact with his son, Lieutenant Colonel Harlows had learned that the special Parimsha-type gummy fruit had been delivered to his son by Vice Admiral Dragon. On this point, He was sincerely grateful and admired Vice Admiral Dragon's trustworthiness. He had originally worried that Dragon would keep it for himself, but now it seemed that the son of marine hero Garp was also an extraordinary individual. Returning to the main topic. Gaspardi was no longer a headquarters private first class. Thanks to the elementalization ability of the special Paramsha type, which was similar to the Logia system, he began to receive attention from the higher-ups. After several missions, he was promoted. He was now a proper headquarters ensign, which was equivalent to a major in this part of the South Blue. But what is this G0 branch that my son mentioned? Why don't I remember a G branch called G0? Just as Lieutenant Colonel Harlows felt a wave of confusion. He saw a group of men in black, filled with killing intent, escorting a group of men, women, and children dressed in luxurious clothes but with their hands cuffed, constantly pleading and crying, walking from the depths of the island. Large numbers of citizens watched in fear on both sides, but neither they nor the Kingdom Army soldier, facing the wary gazes of the various ranks of Marines, dared to speak loudly or attempt to rescue the king's entire family. Ah, is it over? That was fast. Indeed worthy of the Cypher Pol 2 agent expert. Lieutenant Colonel Harlows sniffed with his nose, keenly smelling the faint scent of blood in the wind. It seems they killed quite a few people in the royal palace. He had originally thought there would be a major conflict with this nation's army when they arrived, but he didn't expect that from the general to the soldier, no one dared to order the cannon or gun to fire. This showed the extent of the Marines' prestige among the world nations at this time. Hey, sooner or later, Gaspardi will also become very strong, just like that Vice Admiral Akanyu, Vice Admiral Kizaru. Chapter 152, Jabba and Shaki at Twin Capes. Day and night and day, they alternated endlessly, though it was unclear when this cycle began. Yet, each night, the starry sky would present different changes, sparking a strong interest in studying the star. But for navigators uninterested in the star, the night represented danger, risk, and adventure. At this moment, the radiance provided by the lighthouse would become an important road poneglyph for direction. At Reverse Mountain on the Red Line, when ship from the Four Seas ascended by following the mountain climbing current and then rushed into the Grand Line on the turret, they could always see two bright lights from below. Although, ordinary people wouldn't choose to pass through Reverse Mountain at night. Not far from Twin Capes, in the dark sea waves, a whale floated on the sea's surface, sleeping peacefully. Thump thump thump, a black shadow appeared in front of the small stone house next to the lighthouse and gently knocked on the door. When the person inside opened the door, the bright yellow light from within instantly illuminated the face of the two people. It's you? A middle-aged man wearing a pink t-shirt paired with blue shorts and a yellow-purple flower-shaped decoration on his head looked at the visitor outside the door in surprise. It's been over a year, Mr. Crocus. Jabba, you. What are you guys doing here? Crocus thought for a moment, then stepped aside and said. Come in first. Thank you. The leading strong man seemed very respectful of the former. After saying thanks, he walked into the house, and the four people behind him followed suit. These people were former crewmate of the Roger pirates. Among them, Jabba, the leader, held a status second only to Rayleigh on the ship, the third in command. It was rumored that his strength was on par with Rayleigh's. But the exact truth was unknown to anyone. Yatu, Doringo, Peter Moo, Yang Long, how did you all gather together? I remember you all returned to your respective sea area, didn't you? Closing the door, Crocus turned around and looked at these people with confusion. His situation was different from theirs. Although he had been on the Roger pirates' ship for a while, strictly speaking, he wasn't a formal crewmate. He was just a temporary ship doctor responsible for treating and suppressing Roger's incurable disease. Mister, you must have heard about Rayleigh's death in Mary Joyce, right? Jabba asked with a heavy expression. Crocus nodded and said. Of course, all I've done all day is read the newspaper and other matter. Then you should know that Rayleigh isn't the type to be impulsive and reckless. He must have sensed that there was important matter happening in Mary Joyce to risk sneaking in. Indeed, I was also surprised by Rayleigh's actions when I saw the news. So, you guys are going to? Crocus looked at them hesitantly, and a bad feeling suddenly arose in his heart. Jabba said. I contacted Shaki before, and she said Rayleigh felt that the source of the world government's recent changes and the end of the Great Bioterra planned by Captain Roger might be a certain person or matter in Mary Joyce, which is why he risked going up to investigate. That's very likely. Crocus mused, acknowledging the conjecture. But Rayleigh didn't manage to transmit the news he gathered in the end, so we want to complete this matter on his behalf. Jabba said with a determined gaze. It's too dangerous. If Rayleigh couldn't do matter, you guys might also. I know, Rayleigh's strength is strong than mine, even strong than a few of us, but we still want to try while we're in good condition. Otherwise, when we get older, we'll truly be hurt but unable. As he spoke, Jabba exchanged glances with the other four and continued. Even if we die, we want to die understandingly, and then before we die, pass the truth to our other comrades. I suppose it's not just you guys, is it? Crocus asked. Yes, the people willing to participate in this operation are Meyer Pine, Max Marks, and Langram, but they aren't in the 4 Seas, so we promise to meet up on a certain island in the Grand Line. Crocus asked strangely. Only 8 people? Not even Spencer. Then who will formulate the operation plan for you? Spencer was equivalent to the strategist of the Roger Pirates, many times. Even Rayleigh had to act according to his plan. He got married, so he doesn't want to risk it with us, but he's willing to receive the intelligence we gather and handle it optimally based on the situation. Jabba said, sighing as he rubbed the back of his head helplessly. Sampill also refused. He's worried that if the Fishman tribe were to sneak into Mary Joyce, it would bring great disaster to all Fishman fellows, especially since Fishman Island and the world government have just reached friendly cooperation. Others also have their own difficulties, and I couldn't force them. Crocus nodded in understanding. That's how it is. But you don't even have a target right now, just like Rayleigh before. You'll go to Mary Joyce without even knowing what to look for, and security there must have been strengthened now. Honestly, I don't recommend you go, because there's a high probability you'll sacrifice yourselves without finding anything. But that's right, you're seeking death, and it won't have any meaning. Just as Jabba was about to say something else, the door behind them was pushed open with a bang, which greatly startled the people inside. They immediately drew their respective weapon and turned around to be on guard. Especially Jabba, who instantly drew the double axes from behind his waist and glared fiercely with both eyes. But upon seeing the figure walking in, his killing intent and aura immediately dissipated. Shaki. The person who arrived was none other than Shaki, dangling a lady's cigarette. This woman's temperament seemed to have changed. She no longer had the gentleness and peacefulness of the rip-off bar owner, but instead had become stern and assertive. Rayleigh's purpose for sneaking into Mary Joyce was to figure out the source of the world government's changes, not to seek death because he had nothing better to do, rushing to see Roger. Jabba and the other 4 fell silent. They knew Shaki definitely had more to say. I want to get revenge for that bastard Rayleigh, and while I'm at it, find out the matter he wanted to know. That way, after I die, I can tell him in the land of the Yellow Springs. But I need manpower, I need expert. Do you want to come along? After speaking, Shaki took the cigarette down and held it between 2 fingers, letting the smoke drift upwards. She stared intently into their gaze. Jabba and the others looked at each other. Can you tell us how you plan to do it? I've done some research on the world government's recent changes. Essentially, they've abandoned the high-pressure policy of the past few hundred years and are shifting towards a more gentle low-pressure policy. This indicates that they've noticed the citizens of the world nations have reached a certain level of tolerance for tyranny, so they want to loosen the rope around their neck a bit and incidentally improve the world government's external impression. Slave liberation is the sweetener they've thrown out. According to the intelligence I have on hand, the world government has already started working on the reform of the celestial tribute system. It will most likely be an agenda item at the next reverie. After listening to Shaki's words, Yatu, who had a relatively naive and impulsive mind, asked doubtfully. How does that sound like all good things? Chapter 153, Revolutionary Army? Coulson. It's certainly a great thing for the world nations. Shaki looked at him and said. But do you believe the world government, which has been in darkness for over 800 years, would suddenly become so benevolent? I don't believe it. They say a leopard can't change its spots, and that's not just true for people, but for a tissue as well. There must be a conspiracy hidden deep within. Rayleigh died because of this. What exactly do you want to do? Jabba asked again. Shaki's eyes flickered with the radiance of hatred, but her expression remained indifferent on the surface. She casually puffed on her cigarette and said softly. It's simple. Destruction and obstruction of what they want to do. While the world government's changes are just beginning, gather the citizens who are being extremely oppressed by the world government and the nobility of various nations, lead them to take up weapons and revolt to overthrow the kings above their heads, spread the thought of revolution to the poor nations, small nations, and every island where life is difficult, and thoroughly stir up the water of this great sea. Jabba and the others were startled by this woman's terrifying idea, but thinking back to her identity as a former Rocks Pirates cadre, it wasn't so strange anymore. You want to wage war directly against the world government? Jabba gave a helpless shake head and said apologetically. Although our strength is decent, it's difficult to block the highest combat power from the Marines. Yan Long and the other 3 nodded unwillingly, admitting this point. After all, the Roger Pirates were not the Rocks Pirates. Unlike the latter, where any cadre was a super big shot. No. There's no need to clash head-on with them. We just need to cover the insight and lead them through the intelligence network I've built over these decades. Once the main troops or top-tier combatants from the Marines are dispatched, we can receive news in advance and relocate. They won't be able to catch us. Speaking of this, Shaki's face was filled with strong confidence. In this world, the only opponent she had in terms of intelligence was Cypher Paul. But even that was just an opponent. As for top-tier combatants, we can cultivate them over decades, or seek out experts we can utilize. I never thought overthrowing the world government was something that could be done in a short period of time. What's important is the thought, to pass down Roger's thought and Rayleigh's thought, and let this tissue we founded continue. To put it bluntly, Shaki wanted to use the remaining value of the latter half of her life to create an influence that would forever be a thorn in the side of the world government. This was her current purpose. Jabba and the others were the first batch of core members she would use to form this influence. So that's it. Alright, count me, Jabba, in. Instead of doing nothing and growing old, it's better to squeeze out my remaining value. If it's for Captain Roger and Rayleigh, I am willing. I am willing too. This is much more enjoyable than opening a boxing gym in my hometown. I'll teach boxing to the young members in the future. Yang Long, wearing spiked boxing gloves, grinned and laughed. Then I'll teach shooting. Peter Mu, wearing a gentleman's hat and a gentleman's suit, touched the spear slung behind his back and said sternly, "Leave swordsmanship to me. After all, I'm a sword master." Yatta said. Good. Shaki had already anticipated this result, so she wasn't surprised at all. She had initiated contact with Jabba and told him about Rayleigh's matter. Then, she looked towards Crocus, who hadn't been speaking. "Mr. Crocus, what about you? We really need your superb medical skill." Crocus pondered for a moment, gave a shake head, and refused her. "Sorry, count this old man out. I need to treat and take care of Laboon. This is my promise with the Rumbar pirates. If it keeps colliding like this, it will soon sink to the seabed as a corpse. However, if you have seriously ill patients or difficult illnesses in the future, you can send them over, and I will do my best to treat them, even if it's for the sake of our past friendship." Shaki thought for a moment and felt this was acceptable. They could use this place as a secret spot. Twin Capes is right below Reverse Mountain and can completely monitor the ships entering and exiting. As for whether the other party would leak it, she wasn't too worried. She had already investigated Mr. Crocus's situation thoroughly. The reason he gave was indeed true, and he had been here for so long that the world government didn't bother with him either. "Alright, since that's the case, we'll take our leave now. We'll be relying on you in the future." "Okay, go ahead. Be careful." Crocus didn't try to keep them. What these people were going to do was too dangerous. He didn't have so many thoughts, he just wanted to accompany Laboon and spend his later years peacefully here. It would be best if he could outlive Laboon and pass away after it died of old age, so he would have no worries. "Oh, right, about the Rumbar pirates you mentioned. As far as I know, they disbanded a long time ago. They might have been defeated by other pirate crews, or they might have escaped from the Grand Line. Anyway, they won't be coming back." "Ah, I already know that." Shaki said no more and then left with Jabba and the others. They were going to meet up with Meyerpine, Max Marks, Langram, and others, and incidentally see if they could gather more comrades. This time, they were trying to sneak into Mary Jo's, so presumably, quite a few people would be willing to join or help secretly. Ho! After they were all gone, Crocus let out a sigh of relief. His mind felt a bit weary, and he sat down, rubbing his temples as he sighed. Isn't a peaceful life good? Why bother living in a situation where you could die at any time, just for some kind of thought? He felt that when Roger disbanded the pirate crew back then, instead of letting Rayleigh take over as captain and continue leading the crewmates on adventures, it was probably because he wanted them to have a peaceful end to their lives. But now, Rayleigh's death in battle had made these crewmates restless, especially that Shaki. The cold glint in her gaze was unsettling. "Forget it, sleep, sleep. I'm just a middle-aged uncle who knows a little medical skill and watches over a lighthouse." He glanced at Laboon outside the window, only to see him lying on the bed, having fallen asleep. Just as he opened his eyes again, awakening from his deep sleep under the illumination of the warm sunlight outside the window, he suddenly heard some somewhat familiar music. It seemed to be coming from outside. And Laboon's most familiar cry, but this sound no longer contained sadness and loneliness, instead, it was filled with joy. Crocus quickly got out of bed, pushed open the door with quick steps, and walked out. But the moment the door opened, the sound of the music suddenly became louder, and the joyful music resonated throughout the entire Twin Capes. "Send you binks say," cried the wind and waves, "let me roam freely." Surging waves, stirring sunset. Listening carefully, he discovered that it wasn't just one person singing, but many people singing in unison. That is, Crocus's gaze looked over and saw a slender man in black standing with his back to him, facing Laboon in the sea at the edge of the red line. And Laboon was wagging its tail and swimming back and forth excitedly, giving incessant cry towards that person from time to time, causing a large amount of wave to turn into raindrops and sprinkle down, which then turned into a beautiful rainbow under the illumination of the brilliant sunlight. He felt a bit familiar. But just as Crocus was preparing to walk down for a closer look, he had just turned around when he saw three men in black walking up the stone steps. The one leading had a pleasant, gentle smile on his face. "Hello, Dr. Crocus. I am Senior Director Coulson of the Administrative Department directly under the Council of State Affairs of the World Government. Nice to meet you for the first time, please guide me." World Government. Crocus's face changed grayly, and his body instantly tensed up. He thought inwardly. Could it be that yesterday's matter was discovered? Oh no. Chapter 154, Kid, what the hell are you looking at the lighthouse for? Haha, don't misunderstand, we're not here to cause you trouble. Senior Director Coulson thought Crocus was scared by their identities and quickly reassured him. Although you were on the Roger Pirates ship before, according to our investigation, you were merely kidnapped by them to treat Roger's disease. Even Shipwright Tom, who built the Oro Jackson for them, hasn't faced any sanctions. Crocus was stunned for a moment, thinking to himself. Looks like it's not because of last night's matter. With that, his body and mood relaxed. Then what are you here for? And who is that person? Saying this, he raised a finger and pointed at the man in black below. Coulson maintained a smile and explained. That person is Mr. Brooke, a former crewmate of the Rumbar Pirates. We brought him here to reunite with the island whale named Laboon. What? Hearing this, Crocus's eyes nearly popped out, and his little heart was startled. The matters he had encountered in the past 2 days were simply too terrifying. Didn't they disband long ago? That was just a rumor. Coulson shook his head and also looked at the back of Brooke, who was accompanying Laboon, listening to music and talking. He explained. Our people found Mr. Brooke in the Misty Sea before. Through communication, we learned that not long after they entered the Grand Line 28 years ago, they were tragically annihilated by a strong pirate crew near the Misty Sea. At that time, their pirate ship drifted into the Misty Sea along the sea current, and because Mr. Brooke had eaten the Parimsha system revive fruit model, resurrection-type devil fruit before, his soul returned to reality from the land of the Yellow Springs. However, his body was left with only skeleton, and he lost his direction in the Misty Sea, so he's been wandering around in there until now. Hearing such an unbelievable experience, Crocus's gaze towards Brooke's back also became complicated. He had thought the Rumbar Pirates had disbanded, gone their separate ways, and broken their promise with Laboon. At that time, he had told Laboon about this without reservation. From then on, Laboon kept hitting the red line next to Reverse Mountain with its head, resulting in cracked wounds all over its head. He was a doctor, so of course, he treated it, but a difficulty was placed before him, which was that Laboon's body size was constantly increasing. It was now over 20 meters tall, taller than many of the giant race, and this wasn't even its adult body size. It would definitely become even bigger in the future. After all, it was an island whale. So you must have heard about Laboon's matter from him too. Thank you very much for bringing him back. Now Laboon won't hit the mountain anymore. After speaking, Crocus looked at them with confusion. But judging by your appearance, it seems you have something to discuss with me? Yes. Coulson nodded and said gently. We learned that your medical skill is extremely superb, so we specifically came to invite you to join the medical academy directly under the health department that the world government has just established. You would work alongside elite doctors from all over the world to research and manage matters related to medical treatment, disease, and medicine. The work location is Drum Kingdom. I believe you must have heard of this nation. I have indeed heard about the medical academy and the World Hospital. This is truly a great thing, but Dr. Kira is already stationed there, so I don't think adding me would make much difference. Moreover, I'm already used to guarding the lighthouse and don't want to get caught up in busyness again. Crocus shook his head and refused. He was speaking the truth, but there was one truth he didn't speak, which was that he didn't really want to work for the world government. In that case, the matter becomes troublesome. Coulson shook his head helplessly and said, You must understand, the reason Shipwright Tom, whom I mentioned earlier, is safe and sound is because the Sea Train project he spearheaded the research for is of great benefit to the world government, and even to the entire world. This is what covered up his crime of building the main ship for the Roger Pirates. Your situation is similar. The world government values your superb medical skill. But if you are unwilling to join the medical academy and contribute your ability, then there is no reason to exempt you from the crime of treating Roger's incurable disease. Are you prepared to go to an eyes lobby with us? After hearing him finish such a long speech, Crocus's expression turned gloomy, and he asked, Are you threatening me? No, I am merely stating facts. Senior Director Coulson looked at him sincerely and said. So I hope you can seriously consider it. Joining the medical academy has no disadvantages for you, and now Laboon doesn't need you to look after it anymore. There's no necessary reason for you to stay here either, is it? To be honest, with your medical skill, staying here guarding the lighthouse is a complete waste and loss to world medical treatment. Oh, by the way, I have a letter from Dr. Kira here. Take a look. Saying this, he took out a white envelope from his chest, on which was written Dr. Kira's autograph. Crocus and Dr. Kira had met a few times before, but they weren't particularly familiar with each other. Still, he took it, opened the envelope, took out the letter paper, and glanced at it. Kid, what the hell are you looking at the lighthouse for? Hurry up and get over here. Medical doctor here needs hands. Just this one sentence left him stunned. Immediately, he gave a bitter smile and remarked emotionally. Dr. Kira's temper hasn't changed at all. Immediately, his gaze fixed on this sentence, and he remained silent for a long time. He was caught in a long period of torn and thinking, and Coulson in front of him did not disturb him. The few people stood on the stone steps, listening to the old tape recorder repeatedly playing the Rumbar Pirates crewmates singing Bink's sake and Laboon's excited and high-pitched wailing sound. Alright, I'll go then. But I want to know, how are you planning to arrange things for Laboon and Mr. Brooke? In the end, Crocus agreed. Firstly, for Dr. Kira's sake. Secondly, Laboon truly didn't need him anymore, and his promise with the Rumbar Pirates was also completed. And thirdly, he wanted to completely cut off contact with Shaki, Jabba, and the others. But he wouldn't actively reveal their matters to Coulson. After all, they had spent a few years together, and there were still some feelings. He just didn't want to be involved in such dangerous and troublesome matters. He felt he had done his utmost. Mr. Brooks' promise with us is that as long as we bring him to reunite with Laboon, he will agree to join the propaganda department and become a performer under its banner. Coulson smiled and answered the other party. That is to say, he will become the third world superstar after Tesoro and Stella. However, there was one more thing he didn't say, which was that Brooke had also joined Cypherpol at the same time. If needed, he would also have to execute missions in secret. But that was confidential. As for Laboon, considering its increasingly enormous body size, do you think it's possible to take it to the Drum Kingdom Sea area? You can continue to look after it during normal times, and Mr. Brooke can also visit from time to time. After all, it's actually quite close to the Sabati archipelago. Not bad, not bad. Crocus was very satisfied with the world government's arrangement and said with a smile. Alright, since the matter is agreed upon, I'm going down to meet Mr. Brooke. What about you? Let's wait a little longer. Senior Director Coulson looked at the wristwatch on his wrist and said with a smile. Since we're already here, let's watch its arrival. I believe the scene will be very spectacular. I heard it will arrive soon. Crocus looked at him with a confused expression. Chapter 155, Yellow Spring Secret and G0 Branch. Brooke? Crocus called out hesitantly to the afro-wearing man in black who had his back to him. Senior Director Coulson and the others were waiting silently by the seaside not far away. He asked them what they were waiting for, but they wouldn't answer, saying that telling him in advance would spoil many surprises. Mr. Crocus. Hearing the voice, Brooke quickly turned around. Seeing the old friend who had clearly aged considerably, he walked over excitedly and clasped his hands with his bone fingers that had no skin or flesh. Thank you very, very, very much for your meticulous care of Laboon all this time. On behalf of the entire Rumbar Pirates, I express our most sincere gratitude. Saying this, he let go of his hands and bowed 90 degrees very seriously, remaining in that position for a long time. Crocus was currently in a state of astonishment. Although he had heard that Senior Director Coulson mention it before, seeing a skeleton with only an afro speaking to him with his own eyes still felt incredible and hard to believe. Alright, get up, Brooke. It's good that you're back. A moment later, Crocus reacted and quickly helped him up. Looking at the empty eye sockets of the other party, he said with emotion. It hasn't been easy for you either. You must have experienced unimaginable pain, right? That's all in the past now. Being able to see Laboon and you again, I'm already content. Brooke laughed very optimistically. There was no other way. If he wasn't optimistic enough, it would have been difficult to live with the skeletons of his companions for so long in the deserted misty sea. When I get to the land of the Yellow Springs in the future, I'll have an explanation for the captain and the others. Although I don't know if I can go there again, that place is actually very large and very lively. I ended up with my body decaying because I got lost there for too long. Very lively. Are there many people, souls there? Crocus was quite curious about the land of the Yellow Springs after hearing Brooke talk about it. Of course, Not only are there many souls, but just as Brooke was excitedly about to talk about what he had seen and heard, a huge noise suddenly came from overhead, attracting his and Crocus's attention. Boom. 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 Indeed, two pirate ships were rapidly diving down from the top of Reverse Mountain, following the almost 90-degree vertical turret. During this process, they were even shooting cannonballs at each other, completely disregarding their own lives. Extremely bold, extremely arrogant. Ah, here they come again. Pirates from different sea areas must have run into each other up there. I just don't know how their luck is. Crocus said calmly, having seen this many times before. The so-called luck referred to whether they were lucky enough to make it down smoothly and then fight for victory on the sea's surface. If they were unlucky, they would both crash into the red line halfway down, becoming wreckage and corpses by the time they reached the bottom. They would have to be cleaned up afterwards. After all, he didn't want Laboon to swallow disgusting corpses. So many years have passed, and pirates are still so energetic. Brooke, however, was very happy watching the spectacle. Since he came out of the Misty Sea, where he had stayed for 28 years, he felt excitement and curiosity about everything in the outside world. As for agreeing to join the world government, the first reason was, of course, to see Laboon and Crocus as soon as possible. The second reason was because they showed him the recording of Tesoro and Stella's performance at the Liberation Day Gala that night. Hearing that he could also become a superstar and hold concerts to his heart's content in front of the citizens, his heart was moved, and he agreed. Brooke no longer wanted to be a pirate, he only wanted to forever maintain the identity of a former Rumbar pirate's crewmate. He felt this was the best thing for both Laboon and himself. It seems their luck is good. Pushed by their mutual bombardment, they luckily dodged the most dangerous area. It looks like there's more excitement to watch, but... Crocus glanced at the three government officials not far away and thought to himself. I wonder if these government officials will intervene with these two pirate crews. If they did, then these pirates' luck wasn't actually that good. Bang. Bang. The two pirate ships smashed heavily onto the sea surface near the lighthouse almost simultaneously, kicking up large sea waves that splashed against the red line rock blocks of Twin Capes. Ha, we're finally down. West Blue Trash, your time has come. A pirate who looked like a captain held a musket in one hand and a cutlass in the other, standing on the edge of the ship and shouting fiercely at the pirate ship opposite. Humphrey, North Blue Dogs, your voyage ends here. Little ones, slaughter them all. The ship, the treasure, the cannons, the food, the fresh water, I want it all. The captain of the other pirate ship roared, waving his long saber without showing any fear. Ooh, whoosh. Whoosh, but just as the pirates from the two ships, hailing from different sea areas, were howling and about to engage in cruel boarding melee combat to fight to the death. Suddenly, two beams of golden flash shot over from a distance. Their speed was so fast that everyone, including Brooke and Crocus, didn't even react. They only felt that in the blink of an eye, the two pirate ships had both turned into expanding balls of fire. They're finally here. Senior Director Coulson, followed by two men in black, grinned, showing his white teeth. Then he took out a small recording transponder snail from his pocket and aimed it towards the sea surface in the direction of the Grand Line. He wanted to record this rare scene as a souvenir. Is that? Crocus's eyes narrowed due to the explosion wind blowing towards him. About 30 seconds later, he saw 4 warships appear on the sea level. But that was nothing. The moment the existence behind the warships came into view, his eye sockets widened at a speed visible to the naked eye, and his pupils suddenly contracted even more. What was he seeing? It's so big. It looks much bigger than Laboon. Is that an island? Brooke turned off his tone dial and put it back inside his skull for safekeeping. Woo-wah-woo. Little Laboon also seemed uneasy, but with Brooke and Crocus nearby, it couldn't follow its instinct to escape into the deep sea. It could only glare fiercely yet cutely at the slowly approaching super colossus, looking like it would protect its companions to the death. However, that huge thing stopped about 300 to 400 meters away from Reverse Mountain. Instead, one of the warships continued sailing towards this side. Immediately after, from behind the left and right sides of that colossus, 4 more headquarters-level large warships appeared. It was being escorted by 8 warships. That's the surprise I mentioned earlier. At this moment, Senior Director Coulson walked over with a smile. Crocus looked at him in surprise and asked, "What exactly is that? It looks like an island?" That's actually an island-sized sailing ship. It's also the base of the newly added Marine G0 branch. From today onwards, it will be stationed at Reverse Mountain, inspecting all passing ships and arresting all passing pirates and lawbreakers. Do people in this era call that resting?